All right, welcome to the Sae Bae cast, number 194 with Gentle Tractor for his second appearance. Gentle Tractor, how are we doing today?
Hello. Yeah, we're doing quite good today. Yeah, thank you for having me on. We are just talking before we started about how long it had been since the last time I've been on, and both kind of couldn't believe it. It's already been like 3 years nearly.
Yeah,
Doesn't seem like that long.
it really doesn't. It feels like maybe two. Like even you
Yeah,
could have told me it's been a year, and I'd be like, oh yeah, it's probably been a year. But three, oh my God, that's
I know it's wild.
yeah. And
The
and
passage
your
of time.
and I believe your cast, that one was the longest we had done at that period. Now, Caveman only came on shortly after and just blew it out of the water. I think his was like
Yeah,
like over six
I think I
hours,
remember that.
6.5 hours or something. But
The fellow bard brother.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the funniest part about the Caveman only cast was we had talked for like an hour and a half before we even started the recording.
Oh man.
So it was like a full 8 hour
I
ordeal.
was gonna say that's like a full work day you just spent there then, just on the one cast.
It was like 4 a.m. by the time we were just like, all right, we're both exhausted. Let's go to bed.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but I bring up Caveman only because yours and his, they come to mind, my mind at least, as some of the great discussions that we've had on the cast just over the years of just cool ideation in the game, things that could potentially fit in the game in the future and stuff. And I just love those kinds of discussions. And I think your episode in particular 3 years ago, for those listening right now, if you guys want to check out his first appearance, it'll be linked in the description. But we talk a lot about the Zaya rework, and this is before Varlamore had ever dropped, of course. And
Mm.
we talk about Bard, and I want to say we probably mentioned sailing, but to be fair, I can't actually remember everything we
Yeah, I
talked
think we
about.
must have at least mentioned it.
Yeah. So I guess first things first, Varlamore has actually entered into the game. We have part one and part two. We are anticipating part three early next year. What are your overall thoughts on Varlamore being in the game?
Oh man, yeah, it's been a bit of a wild ride, I think, for that one to come to where we are today to see it in game. Yeah, it's difficult to kind of break it all down. I guess maybe it's worth me giving a bit of a timeline of that because it kind of where Valamore is at today starts, I guess, kind of last year. I can talk about when Jagex first approached me about, well, basically saying, "Hey, we want to do Valamore as our next big expansion, and we'd like you to be involved in it to help plan out the design, like lay out the map for us." I was like, "Whoa, that's that's a big thing to just drop on me like that." It came at a bit of an interesting time for me as well, though, because prior to that, they'd actually also reached out to me. I think maybe a few weeks or a month before about new skill related stuff, and obviously sailing. At that point in time, it was still like sailing and shamanism and taming and the discussion surrounding that. And I'd already signed on and agreed to working on some projects with them for those topics. And so, having already agreed to that, they then came back and said, "Hey, would you also be willing to do this?" I was like, "I mean, yeah, definitely, but that's quite a big workload to take on, and juggling that between my normal work stuff." So, anyway, just last summer for me was quite a packed one, a bit stressful at times as well, working on it. Um, but yeah, to see it come to the game now, it's pretty surreal. I would say in a way I don't think it's fully sunk in yet for me either. I think the process of putting it all together as well was so intensive, and obviously there's still a bit more to come in terms of like as we're recording this we've got like the first two major batches and a third big one still to come. I think maybe at that point in time it might like really start to settle. It's like, wow, okay, there's this whole huge landmass in place now that helped shape, and where that started from is even more amusing to think about, I guess, as just kind of a I won't call it a throwaway, but it was like a bit of a eh bit of just like little inclusion in a map made some, oh god, what are we years now? This would be like 8 years ago, wouldn't it? 8.5 years ago.
Probably, yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah, early 2016. Um, so yeah, it's gone through a quite a journey to get to this point in time alone. Um, yeah, in terms of developing, I don't know if you want me to go into a bit of that, like my approach with actually making the map when Jagex first contacted me last year about it.
Let's yeah, before we get into that, just
Yeah.
one thing I would like to hear is just what inspired you in the first place to even are you just naturally creative? Are you just naturally just somebody that wants to create some cool maps and share them on Reddit? Because I believe it was just shared on Reddit at that point. I mean, it was just
it's
for
basically
fun.
made a Reddit account. Like Gentle Tractor was never meant to be a thing. It was just a throwaway Reddit account for sharing something I made about Zaya, and then that was going to be it. It was going to be like discarded and move on from it. But then it just happened to go a little bit viral, and then people were talking about it and then messaging me. I was like, oh, can't get rid of this now. It stemmed from that, and I guess the reason that exists is directly because of essentially. Varlamore specifically essentially exists because I wanted to try and highlight some of the flaws of Kurend at the time, and one of the big things was how Kurend at that point in time was still being referred to as a city. So it was like this single city that covered like a third of the entire map. It was so huge, right?
Yeah.
It was giant. So I was like, okay, first things first, it's too big to be called a city. Either you got to shrink everything down, which would be a huge amount of work, or like reclassify it as a kingdom. And a good way of emphasizing that would be, well, what if this landmass is much bigger than we think, and there are other kingdoms on the landmass? So Kurend is just one of multiple kingdoms. So really, Varlamore exists largely in service to try and highlight the flaws of Kurend. So it's kind of weird to see that, come full circle. And well, it's not to get too ahead of myself, but it's a bit bittersweet in a way, because even just going back a couple of years, I don't think I would have ever expected us to get Varlamore before seeing Kurend a little bit more finished. I would have so desperately loved to have seen the remaining like northern half of the Shazian and north of Shazian, like Lovakeng, Archaeus and Piscarilius, like brought up to a better standard of quality. But I get it from Jags' perspective. The new flashy exciting stuff is always a much easier sell to the players than reworking, improving old stuff. But I don't know, I feel like that maybe is a big conversation point that could be had in the future. I would like to see the old school team have anyway, because part of me feels like that pendulum has swung a little bit too far in the direction of lots of new stuff rather than maintaining and improving the old stuff.
Yeah, and I was talking to Mod West just like a month ago or so. He came on, and there is no set plans in stone of having those last three areas reworked, but they obviously are aware that those need to be reworked. I mean, they just look so tacky with the Shazian rework. Hosidius looks great, and Varlamore is just beautiful. And then you walk into Archaeus, and you're like,
oh boy,
this place is just depressing. I mean, it's just truly depressing. It's an eyesore.
As much as I'm happy with things like I personally was a big fan of the complete removal of favor. Finally, I was always a big advocate of that, because I do think the system itself was just fundamentally flawed and not very RuneScapey with how it was implemented. So I was happy to see it go, but I do think it was a little bit hastily removed, and it's left lingering things that would have been nicer to have been just spend a little bit more time improving it and leaving it in a more positive and usable spot. Like things like the Archaeus spellbook, I think that really deserved its own unique quest, even if that requires making a new quest from scratch, even if it didn't have requirements to ensure people could still get that base Archaeus spellbook and the reanimation spells and whatnot. I just think things like that needed like a little bit more grounding into the world in a more traditional capacity, and a few of the other former activities that were associated with favor are now just sort of existing, like sulfur mining and saltpeter and stuff, and it's like it's not really doing anything anymore, is it? Like no one's actually going to go out and do that just for fun or to get the resources, because there are other better ways of getting them, or you just don't need them. So I don't know, there are things there that I think it would have been nice to have been cleaned up properly, and hopefully fingers crossed one day they can come back to that.
I mean, one of the just based on the spellbook thing that you mentioned, I mean, that seems like kind of a big ask for people that are already using the spellbook. Imagine there is a new quest that requires you, and then like, okay, what are you supposed to do now? Are you forced to do this new? I mean, I guess they really could just do that if it's something short and sweet. But you are right. It's got to feel connected, and a lot of those things just felt like, okay, just get them now because we're just going to fully remove it.
Yeah, I think it's still in need of like, it's not even just like a visual thing either. I'm still a big advocate of that. It needs better and more content to really flesh out those areas like Lovakeng and Archaeus and Piscarilius even. I think all of them could do with just a little bit more, and especially now we're seeing Varlamore. I think when Varlamore is done, and it'll have quite a broad range of fairly impactful content, hopefully, by the time the third batch is in place. and lots of quests. I think maybe there's already more Varlamore quests than Current quests technically. I'd have to go and add up the numbers, but I think it's about at that point. It's still a bit sad remembering when they pitched this idea of Twisted Tales, if you remember that, like standalone Current quests. That would have been like years ago now. I think we got one of them, or maybe kind of two, and then one of them turned into a prerequisite for Desert Treasure 2. So yeah, Varlamore already has like a multitude of standalone quests that are really fun, quirky, light-hearted things. And yeah, Current is just gonna, I think it is gonna stick out more like a sore thumb by the time Varlamore is done, like early next year, or at least, you know, done as far as anything is done in this game. What
can Jagex do, or what can the community do, in fact, or I guess both ways. It really goes both ways. What would need to happen to encourage the just bloomification of Zaya? I mean, just like really pimping it out. Like, do you think that's a community response? Like, does the community need to be like, Jagex, like, this place is bad, it needs to be reworked, we got to add more life to it? I mean, or you know, how does that go about?
I think my gut says probably yes, what you just said there. Like, I've been thinking about that for a while in this past year, especially with, again, everything Varlamore related coming out, and being very excited about that, but also, as I say, it's like the bittersweet feeling in a sense of like awesome seeing all this new stuff, but the twinge of sadness not having the old stuff improved. I do think the community is probably going to be needed. That's where I'm really curious, because, you know, I've already mentioned a few times this early on in the cast that the passage of time and how much time has passed is quite shocking when you think about it. Like, old school is some 11 plus, I mean, going on 12 years now almost. Yeah. And Current, like the original Zaya release, is not too far away from being 10 years old. Like, next year it will be turning 9. So 2026 is like 10 years. It's like, wow. If Current manages to reach 10 years old and not be like suitably or adequately done, that's going to be quite disappointing. But again, to get it to that point, I do think, sadly, internally, there is very little. No, I was going to say there's little appetite. That's not true at all, because, like you mentioned, like Mod West, I mean, my God, he's a champion and a half anyway. I don't think Zay would be anywhere near as what it is today without his involvement and pushing some of the early stuff all those years ago now. And I mean, the rest of the team have done a fantastic job as well with how much the team has grown in just the last, 8 years since Zay has come out. But again, there's only so much that like the individual developers and artists and testers and everyone can do for themselves. They can be super passionate about something. At the end of the day, the slightly more senior positions are deciding what is the content roadmap looking like, what is the schedule looking like. I just think it's a really, really, really difficult sell to them to try and pitch spending a significant amount of resources improving an old thing. So I do think to get that happening, it probably is going to require a bit of a grassroots movement from the players again, because that's essentially how it started the first time around. Yeah. And I definitely don't want to take too much credit myself, because I think I happened to get quite lucky in the right place at the right time and just shared the right kind of image that was very easy to digest for people. But a lot of people have been talking about, when Zaya first came out, the issues with it, right? The flaws and what they would like to see improved. And I think that energy managed to be channeled quite effectively in a lot of sustained community requests. Like, a lot of people may not have even been around for. It's interesting to think about where we're at now and how much the player base has grown just in the years, the last 5 to 6 years. There are probably a lot of people who played today who actually didn't play at the release of Zaya and don't even know what that was like and what that conversation had to look like. But there was a lot of moaning on Reddit and Twitter that some of us had to do to see some of those changes made. So I do wonder if that's going to be necessary. Not necessarily moaning, but constructive criticism and requests and suggestions, right? But is the player base even in a position to want to rally behind that anymore? I honestly don't know. I don't know if there's a strong enough appetite to be able to get that kind of grassroots movement to push something like that forward, which again makes me on a personal level a little bit sad, because I'm always going to be, as we're already talking about this straight off the bat, it's a topic that's going to be near and dear to my heart, wanting to see that area fleshed out and finished to a really high standard of quality. What it's going to take, I don't know. I'd love to. I've had some discussions with a few other people in the community and got a few other creative folks and map making enthusiasts and whatnot in a separate little private Discord server where we chat about all things game design related for old school. And there's a number of us who are very keen to maybe even consider collaborating a little bit, almost do a little community game jam, see if we can pull some ideas together,
Ooh.
bring in a few different community like map suggestions, because I've got a bit of my Loverking rework map. There's a couple of different incarnations of Arceus and Piscarius that have been floating around. Maybe we combine all these with some like content suggestions, some PVM skilling suggestions, quest suggestions, and sort of present it as a big community driven project. That might be able to get some more attention. But
Yes.
at this point in time, I don't know. It's difficult to say, but I do think there's probably going to need to be a big push from the community if it was ever going to happen.
I think that last part of, really dropping something that is not just a map redesign, because I feel like, yeah, you're right. The community, I don't think, would just jump on the bandwagon of simply a visual redesign. They need the content. Yeah. They need to be really, like, you need to tell the story of how this is important. And I think with your earlier posts, those long, I don't know if it's still the meta to make those long skyscraper posts. I mean, those are
some
great.
Of them still do well, but yeah, I haven't made one for myself in quite a while nowadays, but I still see some of them getting some traction. So yeah, I think they're out there.
See, those, if you would post one of those with, after a bunch of, discussion and stuff in your private Discord, make sure, every community is being spoken for, the PVM community, the skilling community, because that's what's really essential. I mean, you see these groups of players. I mean, there are some players, a pretty hefty group of players that only care about PVM updates and high-level PVM updates. And I can't say it's really like, I don't know. It's weird over time. I just feel like this is more a problem with the high-level community, I think, rather than across the board. I think the high-level community have been stuck as maxed players with what they see as limited content, and so all they crave at all times is just another raid or another super endgame boss or something like that. And so they've gotten to the point where they've almost become sort of like upset or just like uptight about anything that comes out that's not catered toward the super high level. And I feel like that can kind of be seen as a problem. I've luckily, I don't think I was ever fully deep in that, end game mindset where it's just, I only want end game stuff. I could recognize the value of mid game stuff, but now that I've actually I'm playing a hardcore group and going through the early game and mid game again, I'm clearly seeing how important so many of these things are to clean up and to rebalance. And Jagex has already had a great start on it as well with Project Rebalance and just adding so many cool little things, mini quests and all this stuff, and just bringing the game more to life. But yeah, it's a big ask to sell that, and I think that is the way forward, though. And your name, even over the last 8 years, it's pretty much been 8 years since you've been on Reddit, and I mean, if you make something on there and it's that branded Gentle Tractor post right there, like I think that's a good start, at least, it's a recognizable name with so I think I agree that that's the way forward is. But yeah, it's going to be tough to like really put it all together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big sucker for kind of like I guess milestones and celebratory things, and just as I mentioned, like with Zaya, like Kuren's original release coming up to a little ways away, 10 years in early, I guess January 2026 it would be. So I guess just over a year away. I think if I were in a position at Jagex to try and plan out a longer term roadmap, that would be something that I'd look towards. Be like, that would actually be quite a nice thing to sort of come back to, come full circle, 10th anniversary of Zaya. Let's have like kick off 2026 with a big, hey, here's like the next big quest after Kingdom Divided, and maybe tie in some of the Varlamore quests because they'll be kind of done at that point, and then do that with a big rework, and then have it all branded and themed around like 10-year celebration of Zaya, improve the final bits of Kuren, and kind of sell that to the players on a nice journey that's been taken over the 10 years of its existence. But I don't know, maybe that could be a part of trying to like sell it to both Jagex and the community if people are as interested in like 10-year anniversary type content updates as I am.
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of the community also has a little bit of OCD. So something like 10-year things just sounds right. Just it's gonna ease the tism a bit. Like it's gonna for me. So I think that's fantastic.
I'm curious. Can I quiz you on something as well, just to sort of double back? Because you mentioned about like high level PVM. I'm curious, like with things like because I think I'd agree in terms of seeing that general sentiment shared and held of the high level PVM community not being offered. What's your response, or, and I guess you speak to a lot of people on the cast as well, probably high level PVMers, to things like the Colosseum? Did that scratch any kind of itch for people? Or, because again, I don't really consider myself to be a wild endgame PVMer, so I wouldn't want to pass judgment on it, but did that like do anything for people in that regard, or not really? Was it perceived to have not hit the mark?
I think it hit the mark for many players, but of course you're only really going to hear the loud minority that's just yelling about any, criticism they have with it. In my eyes, this is actually a great question, because I've been trying to sort of formulate how I see the high level community, and everyone has a differing view of things, but most people, when I see the people that are yelling about high-level updates, most people love TOB. TOB is the gold standard of all-time best PVM updates. I mean, it has amazing replayability. It captured everything they ever wanted in a raid. There's no weird modifiers or invocations or puzzles or anything. It's just straight up, just click boss, kill it. And I mean, even the devs, Kieran in particular, had mentioned with the Colosseum that, the modifiers maybe didn't go over as well. They're always trying new things, and I'm always happy to see them try new things, and because that's
for sure,
that's how we're gonna get good, unique updates in the future, is just taking those risks. But Colosseum, I do think, landed quite nicely. I think a lot of people enjoy it, but I think most people in the high-level community think Inferno is better, and I think there's probably an element of nostalgia with that, and just how much the skill level has increased since that time. I mean, when Inferno, if the Colosseum had dropped at the time Inferno had dropped, that would have been crazy.
For sure, yeah.
Especially with the lack of weapons, but yeah,
definitely. I think I hear a lot from. It's almost like there was I'm trying to remember dates off the top of my head now, like maybe an 18-month golden window from, I guess it would have been 2017 to 2018, where it was Chambers of Xeric, and then the Inferno, and then Tob. I think it was that, wasn't it?
Yep, 18 months, yep.
Yeah, and that's, I've heard that, period referred to as, that was peak PVM, where it's, everything was just the next most intense, difficult, insane challenge. Never could have perceived it being topped, but then it did, and I think that's what's grabbing that particular part of the player base, that I guess when you look at the full roadmap of content that's been released since then, from 2019 onwards, I can kind of see why people wouldn't necessarily be as happy. And like you mentioned, Tob as well is seen as a bit of a gold standard there. I think I do wonder actually if part of that is from that, again, there's a degree of simplicity to it, the static difficulty, and the fact that it was, again, at launch anyway, and same with Inferno, and even I guess Chambers to an extent, all perceived quite as quite a difficult challenge, and they didn't have anything in the way of easy mode entry story thing or customizable difficulties. And I think that has maybe let down things like TOA, and maybe not so much Colosseum, but with its unique system of modifiers, obviously that changes the way it plays and doesn't quite have that static linear feel. I do wonder if maybe for a future raid, a hypothetical raids 4, whether Jagex will be better off saying, hey, for the launch of this raid, we're just going to launch with a default, fairly difficult level of difficulty. And then maybe if they want, because I get the impression Jagex really do want things to be quite accessible these days, which makes perfect sense, right? They're trying to have a big appealing game to a lot of players, and they want as many people doing as much content as possible. I totally get that. And I imagine Theatre of Blood is probably one of the least played or engaged with raids, just purely from its difficulty and group-based requirements for the most part. But if they want to both try and have their cake and eat it, I think it would be interesting to see a future raid release where the default release was just one standard difficulty mode, and then maybe 2 to 4 weeks later they do, okay, now here's the entry mode, after the fact, just giving the high level community that 1 month window to just have this is the really difficult meaty piece of content that we designed to be very difficult. Scratch that itch, and there's no easy way of cheesing it to learn the mechanics first. It's just this is the difficult version, and then maybe a slightly more accessible version can come in later so everyone can get involved. But what do you think of something like that? Do you think that would work or not?
That is exactly actually what I propose. It's literally just days ago I was talking to Sinferno,
really?
and that's exactly what I proposed. I mean, that is exactly what I want. I even took it one step further and said, several months down the line after we've introduced entry mode, because I said, around 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 2 to 6 weeks, whatever feels right, to introduce that entry mode right after the default difficulty. And then several months down the line, introduce the challenge mode after, everything's been solved and the devs have a great view of like, okay, what can we do to just level up this for those that really want the difficulty spike. And I think that's, and then you can introduce the kits. I've always enjoyed, having some cosmetics that come from that. And I think that really is the way to go, where and there's no modifiers, no invocations. It's simply, this is what it is. It's extremely difficult on release. So, you're going to capture that hype that TOB had, where you have to have a coordinated team, you have to have the end game gear, you have to have a lot of skill, and you jump in there and you're going to be failing over and over because it's very difficult and they haven't told you the mechanics. And then, like you said, 2 to 4 weeks down the line, everybody can jump in because everyone's been watching it. Those streams go crazy, and then everyone has their chance to just jump in and just give it a test drive, kind of, where it's super easy. I feel like I'm not sure the analytics of how well entry mode TOB did. Like, I think their objective with it simply was to get people to feel like, okay, TOB is something I could probably get into. And I'm not sure how well that played out. Maybe it did a great job. So I'm not actually sure how important entry modes are, but I still do think, something to dip your toes in is appropriate for a raid.
Yeah. I guess the entry mode TOA is probably way more popular just because of the whole, you can actually get drops from it, right? Like the whole premise of that, even if some of them are much, much rarer, and I'm under the assumption that the majority of like TOA rares are coming in from people doing like the 400 plus invo kind of runs. But even still, just knowing you've got a chance. And I guess entry mode TOB just being like, nope, you get not a thing. There's just like, we're all very simple-minded gamers, I think, who are driven by the carrot on the end of the stick, right? And if there's no carrot, then it's like, is there any point in doing this? Yeah. Knowing there's literally nothing at all, like, probably not. So I imagine that's really damaged entry mode TOB's whole existence. And the fact that it was originally tied in with a quest that, the original quest wasn't even a quest. Like that night of the theatre, when it was just, go and do a TOB run. Well done, you did the TOB run, have some XP, whatever. At least they did flesh out into a proper quest after the fact, but I think that both of those two factors maybe worked against it on that one.
What do you think about entry mode? Having a very rare chance of getting something, is that appropriate? Well, and for a raids 4 as well, like, do you think that would be a better route to go down?
I'm personally okay with that as long as you can get the balancing right, I suppose, and the numbers right. Again, I'm making assumptions here, but my understanding of TOA is that like the majority of rare drops are coming from like higher invocation runs. So it's not so much the existence of being able to get those drops on the low ones that are really impacting the price. And I know TOA uniques are quite cheap relative to how good some of them are. But again, I think that's probably largely down to just how scalable the accessibility is in that one. Plus, the customization of it, letting you kind of like ramp it up. With just offering some sort of rare loot from entry, I think is okay, as long as it's been designed with that in mind. I guess TOB, because it was all done retroactively, a bit more difficult to do, because it was added after the fact, whereas TOA was kind of done from the start, and they were to balance it a bit more accordingly, maybe. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would need to be done on a bit of a case-by-case basis, I suppose. Yeah,
I agree. I'm trying to think, because entry mode TOB really is for babies. It's just like it's hand holding the whole time. There are some elements of it where it's like, whoa, okay, this is a little bit more difficult than I had anticipated, because like everything else is just really hand holdy. But so I wonder for raids 4, for example, if an entry mode would even have to be an entry mode, or rather just easy mode, or I don't even know what they would consider it, like something without that, just easy or baby, like something that's
I know what you mean.
Not quite standard, but just a little bit below it, where it feels doable and you could go in with learners. I think that's the important thing, of something where like, okay, these guys are still capable PVMers, but they have no experience in this raid. So here's the half difficulty where you can still pull items. they're going to be 5 times more rare or whatever than the standard version, or maybe even 10 times if that's what people want. But it's not completely hand holding. You're still going to die. You're still going to get some, you're going to have to really pay attention to mechanics, but it's not going to be the real experience quite yet. So who knows if that, maybe that just dirties the water a bit, though. You don't want something that's just right below it, because then it's like, oh, why even do this ever? And I don't know. I think it's a tough thing to balance. You're right. It's all about getting those numbers right.
It really will be difficult finding that sweet spot, as you say, of like, because you do want it to be, just like you say, you want it to be challenging enough to still feel satisfying when you overcome it, especially for who the intended audience would be, right? Of less competent or less confident PVMers. But yeah, if you go too low, then it does feel a bit top entry mode, which is just you can kind of just like face tank a lot of the mechanics even, and it doesn't really, then you're not really learning anything at that point if you've gone too easy, and if it's too difficult, then it defeats the purpose of it at all existing for the intended audience. So yeah, very difficult one for Jagex to hit the sweet spot on that balancing wise, but if they manage it for any pieces of content, then that I think they're generally positive things to exist, but yeah, difficult to get right.
Yeah, this is actually, I remember years and years back when I was first learning TOB, and one of the most upsetting things, and this is before entry mode had come out, one of the most upsetting things was trying to learn it, and Verzik P2 was, the point where now you're in this 4-tick cycle. You don't really know what's going on. The visuals are messing you up. There's acid, flying your way. And then you just die. You die to a crab that runs into you. And then you're just sitting there, and you don't actually get any more practice. You're just sitting there. I always thought it would be kind of interesting and a cool way to almost like, if you die, you turn into a ghost version of yourself, but your ghost is still in the arena and you do ghost damage. And you also receive ghost damage to yourself. So you still get all that practice, and you're sitting there, and you're just a ghost that's actually offering nothing to the actual fight, but you still get to be in that area to practice. And that would be a fun way, rather than standing in a cage and just waiting. Yeah,
it's a bit harsh of a punishment, isn't it? And then, as you say, you don't really get to learn anything more from that point onwards. If you just make a mistake early on, that's it. You just condemned to the shame cage of watching. So if you can figure out a way of having you still be able to participate, even just a minor capacity, just so you can still get a feel of the mechanics, that would probably be quite a good thing.
And then there really is no punishment. I mean, because you enter P3, you're still a ghost, you're still doing ghost damage, and then you get to run the webs with the team. But if you mess up, it's your first time running webs, you don't really know what's going on. At least if you mess up, your ghost is receiving ghost damage and ghost webs. I mean, your guy's just really not actually interacting in the actual raid, but you're seeing this visual ghost stuff that's helping you to learn. And I don't know, I just thought that'd be like an interesting way to go about, I don't know, maybe for like a Raids 4 or something. Who knows what their plan is. But I do think the devs are straying away from invocations and modifiers. I really do think they're going to go back to those TOB roots. So yeah,
I'd like to see that again. I think the team where it's at today, currently taking on another TOB-esque experience, would be a really, really interesting one to see, because I think they've learned so much and produced so many more things in all the years since. I think they could make something very, very spectacular.
I have to say, they're really starting to understand what feels good in game. Like, they've made some mistakes here and there with some updates, but I gotta say, just this past few weeks with Varlamore Part 2 being dropped, that mastering mixology, I'm very impressed with the gameplay. I mean, you're making an herb lore minigame. I mean, what you can't make something extraordinary out of that. I mean, what do you this is going to be tough to really try to get players involved with, but they really nailed it, because it doesn't feel like a typical skilling minigame where there's a massive arena, there's a bunch of people, you kind of got to engage with them a little bit, and this is like a solo thing, but you're with everybody. And it's really contained. It's like a cozy environment, and it just feels very straightforward. I mean, you learn it so quickly, and the gameplay loop is addictive. It's like you finish one set of potions, you go back and do the next one, and you don't want to leave. Like, there's something that's like calling you back every time, which I don't know how they nailed that exactly, but it feels good to just keep going. And they also finally I feel like they're finally understanding how annoying stickiness is in this game, where there's lag when you've, or there's like tick delays after you've clicked on a station or something. Like, I could have totally seen them just make that same mixology, but having weird delays with things, just unnecessary delays, and not making things quite as snappy, and which would make the whole thing feel off and terrible. But no, I think they actually had some QA testers that were going in and be like, okay, this is actually not feeling good, so let's remove some of the stickiness. And I think what they've managed to create there is just phenomenal. And I look forward to like them finally understanding how good things feel when things are just left clickable, and you just feel like you're bouncing back and forth between things. And I just feel like that feels good. And so on top of them finally capturing what's good in PVM, they're also really understanding what's good about skilling. And I'm excited for the future. I think even Madalena and somebody else, there was a game jam thing, and they want to come out with more sort of, high level skilling activities that are, rhythm based. And I think that's what's really important, is that kind of rhythmic skilling without it being wrist breaking. And that's what we've seen over the years, is just constant herb tar, knife log, yada yada, dropping every single resource you get, which is just, it's so archaic and it's so unnecessary. And vast majority of the community wants no part in it. So you have this really tiny niche of players that are the high level people going for like 200 mil that see this as like, this is irrevocable. I mean, this is how old school needs to be, this knife log bullshit until the end of time, where most players are never going to get involved. So I just see it as like, can we please move on to the rhythmic skill and everything that makes those methods good? Because there is some value in those rhythmic methods like 3-tick 4G, but the dropping resources is not what's offering any real value. And also the constant knife logging is not offering that much. So I think there's beauty in a simplistic rhythmic skilling method, but get rid of all the nonsense where it just scares people off and it's overly intimidating to the average player. So I'm hoping with Madalena bringing up that, so I think one of the like skilling methods she was thinking of is like some sort of a fishing spot with like 3 different paths of fish. And I think they even kind of introduced it with Moons of Peril. I don't know if that's quite what they're aiming at, but something like that. I'm excited for the future of skilling is what I'm trying to get after.
Me too, I think. Yeah. Like you say, with that, I'd completely echo your comments on that one. And like the mixology minigame, I've only done a very little bit of it so far, but I'd agree with everything you said. It's got that nice rhythmic feel to it, and as you say, it's quite nice, tightly packed and contained feel to the gameplay loop itself, and just those few little interactions that give those little bursts of like spam click this thing and then like click this thing in the right time, and while small things to pay attention to while still having a relatively even cycle to sort of keep that rhythm going. I think you're right. I think they did a good job of that one and starting to bake in interesting skill engagement mechanics and methods rather than relying on, as you say, the weird archaic remnants of unintended things from 20 years ago, which I think is a good direction to try and be heading in.
Yeah, I mean, and it's great that, even one thing I was thinking of is how obnoxious it would have been for that mixology minigame to, have it so, you click on one of the, benches where you're like mixing potions, and imagine there was a menu that had to pop up every single time you had to click space, or you had to do something where it's like, oh, you got to click this option. So it's just like unnecessary baggage. Like I could see them going down that route just to be like, oh yeah, this is going to make it a little bit more complex. But no, ultimately nobody wants it. We just want the simplicity. Just left click the thing. And I think they nailed it with that. And I'm really happy with what they were able to do with that.
I think they did a good job overall, because I don't think I saw really too much like in-depth negative criticism about gameplay being on offered in things like Varlamore Batch 2 and even Batch 1 to an extent as well. I think a lot of people were maybe displeased with certain balancing, like as is always the case, it seems to be, whether something is too slow or fast or not rewarding enough or too much. But yeah, I didn't see too many complaints of people saying, I absolutely despise this gameplay. It just straight up shouldn't exist at all.
No, they nailed it. Actually, I was gonna ask. Oh yeah, that you mentioned Varlamore Part 1. I mean, Moons of Peril was one of the things that came out, and they, a lot of things I feel like are slowly being introduced into the game. For example, potions. Everything is self-contained in Moons of Peril. You're making your potions that give you the combat stats plus run energy plus prayer. And it's very simple. You don't have to make, it's not like Chambers where you have to make 3 different sets of potions and remember all the ingredients and go get the seeds and all this stuff. It's just like, no, you've made it very simple. And one of the things I actually want to ask you is about run energy, because that had been discussed and it kind of got scrapped briefly because people weren't satisfied with the, blog proposal of it. But we're slowly seeing this drip of, just kind of like run energy not being necessary in a lot of self-contained areas anyway. Like they really try to add little pools or add potions that heal your run. I mean, even TOA, the salts, just you don't need to bring stamps into TOA. You're good. And it's interesting. So do you have any like overall thoughts on run energy and the direction they maybe should go with it?
Ooh, yeah, that's an interesting one because, as you say, like it's been very heavily minimized more and more frequently in recent years. So I think clearly the old school team have identified that. And as you say, the most recent proposal for a more extensive rework, I think it did go, I get what they were going for. And I also get that they're stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place. Because I guess on the one hand, they want to try and, they want to make run energy feel good at the worst point, which is for new players, which is truly an awful experience when you've got low level agility and no run and constantly having to move around the world. But they also want to make agility feel impactful in your run energy restoration or drain rates or what have you. But in order to do both of those things, then you'd probably need to end up quite heavily buffing just run energy outright. I guess the question should then be, like, is that okay at this point in time? Like, would that be a sacrifice most players would be willing to make for a more comprehensive rework of it, to make it both just more generous to start with and also more generous at high level agility to keep agility feeling good and useful? I do think at the minute it is a bit all over the place and very weird how we now have situational pieces of content where it is essentially completely unnecessary to even consider. Because as you say, there's systems that now mitigate it and automated, here, have 100% run energy back for completing these little things or clicking on this pool or whatnot. And even at a low level, like mentioning pools, it's always been a bit funky considering the way to alleviate the run energy issues from fairly early on in the game is to essentially just get yourself some rings of dueling as early as possible, get your backside to Ferrex Enclave, and then go and click a pool or a portal in and out. And it's like, that's not intuitive in the slightest, is it? Like, that's awful. Like, no one's actually, I guess that's the spoiler of like agility, right? Like, spoiler alert, agility isn't even really being used by a lot of people for its intended purposes of like restoring run. They're just bypassing it by using these kinds of instant restoration mechanics. And they're so badly telegraphed and presented to the player that a new or low level or inexperienced player would never even begin to comprehend, like, that's how you deal with it. And obviously when you get to a higher level, it's just straight to your POH. So I think there's a strong justification and grounds for doing some deeper gutting of the systems, and especially when you consider the context of where it all came from, right? Like, this is a relic of the transition from RuneScape Classic to RuneScape 2. So back in 2003, 2004, because Classic didn't have running. It was only one move speed. It was just all walking. And so the big new thing with RS2 was you can now move at twice the speed, 2 tiles in a single tick instead of 1. So obviously, I guess they viewed that as like, well, this is a massive buff to the game. You can get everywhere in half the time now. So let's be really strict with it. Let's treat this like a precious resource that people can only use a little bit at a time. But obviously, that I think that makes sense from the context of looking at it where it was 20 years ago. But I don't think it stands up to scrutiny now, 2 decades later.
Yeah, and I mean, we've also had 4 leagues, and just giving those people that taste of what it feels like to just permanently run. People have really gravitated toward, okay, this feels great. Now, obviously, there's nuance to that. There are some players that would just want to see run being completely just obliterated from the game, or walking, just the run system in general. And I think that's not a great route to go down. I think there's still value in these energy potions and agility training in general. I brought up it's tough because, I'm thinking, I like that agility means something. I like that stamina pots mean something. I think I was talking to Mod Arcane about it. He mentioned something like, okay, why do energy potions, early level Iron Men, you got these energy potions that just, they heal 40 run in 4 doses. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And there's no stamina effect. There's no even minimal stamina effect, maybe 30 seconds of it. If you were to just make simple buffs to these potions, just energy pots and super energy pots to really make them feel worthwhile, that would go a long way. And then on top of that, I mean, I've loved the idea of having pubs be worth something. So you enter in the
Yeah.
vicinity of a pub, and you now have like a 10x regen rate of run. So you sit in there for 30 seconds, even at 1 agility, and you're just fully loaded, ready to go. And who knows, maybe even the bartender sells an energy pot to you. You can just buy an energy pot.
Yeah.
And it's something like that where, okay, now there's like this little hub in cities where you just go in there briefly, buy something, and by the time you've bought something and gotten out, you're already fully restored and run energy, plus you have another potion ready to go for your questing adventures. And I think just something as simple as that could go a long way.
Yeah. Even if they're not kind of micro or macro efficient necessarily, I think it goes a long way. Speaking of just something that feels thematically fitting, I think it's also very telling to me that, like you said, that you bring the pubs and bars as like a restoration, because that, I think that whether this is still the case or not, but for the longest time, I think that was actually one of the most popular or highly upvoted suggestions on the subreddit, of just literally what you just said, right? Like, go into a pub and it restores your energy faster when you're in there. And something dead simple like that the majority of players who are probably reading that probably wouldn't even really engage with necessarily. They might be leveled beyond the point of it mattering too much. But the fact that it speaks so loudly to people, I think that says something. And I don't think those little things that may not serve as like a comprehensive solution to everything should necessarily be dismissed, because I think they can work nicely as a small little slice of a bigger, a bigger solution. I mean, I would have liked to have seen other things like, like just putting down a fire and being able to like click and rest by the fire and have that increase your energy a bit more. Again, it wouldn't necessarily be efficient to ever chop a tree, light a log, and then wait by it, but to me, that just thematically feels appropriate.
Yep.
To just be able to like rest by a little campfire for a while. I mean, we technically have that in game. I don't like sitting by a campfire with forestry stuff, but I don't think it actually does anything. I think it's just cosmetic. But yeah, I mean, I'll be down with little things like that. Just being like, yeah, no, the tier of fire that you just lit, like a little oak fire, has a slow but slightly increased energy restoration, and a redwood fire can just be like, woof, let it restore quite a lot. Just tiny little fire making inclusion. But yeah, just little things like that. Pubs, resting by a fire, or little things that feel thematically fitting, even if not meta defining. I think they would go a long way to just making those run energy woes gradually diminish a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And for the high level players, that want something catered their way. I mean, even if nothing happened with the run energy system itself, if those little changes were to happen, energy pots mean something. Pubs now sell you drinks that can heal your run. I mean, I'm just thinking of early Iron Man. But then we can also have extended staminas. I mean, I'm surprised extended staminas haven't come out. A 4-minute stam, that now has, for people that bring 2 stams into chambers or 2 stams into Inferno, now you could just bring 1 potentially, And I think little things like that, just to keep these things valuable, like keep stamina still relevant and keep some of this stuff relevant, I think is just the way to go. But yeah, it's a tough one. I'm curious to see what the devs come up with in the next blog regarding it.
I definitely am as well.
Yeah. Okay, let's. There's so many other branches to go off of, but I want to cover some sailing stuff. So, sailing's been in. Actually, I want to start off this discussion by asking you how you felt about the 3 original proposals: taming, shamanism, and sailing. And surprisingly, Bard was not even offered. I was hoping, I feel like
not.
I feel like the overall consensus with Bard in particular, it didn't capture the community's attention as much as I would have hoped, and probably you and Caveman Only, and I think Screet Monge was part of that as well, right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. didn't quite hit. I feel like most people want something combat related or really adventurous, kind of related like sailing. But yeah, what were your overall thoughts on those three proposals? Were you happy that sailing was the one that was picked? And then we'll jump into sailing a bit.
Yeah, I think overall, on a personal level, I think I probably was happiest with sailing. Maybe controversially, because I know so many of the conversations were dominated with like sailing versus shamanism. I think for full disclosure, like shamanism was my least favorite of the three by quite a margin. I actually really liked taming a lot. To me, it's one of those things that just feels like a very simple, grounded concept that has like a nice, clear core identity, and that's something that I really like about skills in general, or a new skill concept. Is something that you can really clearly and easily define. And that's what I thought both sailing and taming had in their strengths. Like sailing, it's very clear, like you are a sailor of a ship, you are going sailing, right? Taming, you are a tamer of a creature, you can tame animals. But for shamanism, it was a bit muddier, I think, because they tried to pitch it as a much bigger and broader skill to begin with. They pretty much established it as like, yeah, this is going to be kind of a gathering skill and a production skill, and it has like utility skill stuff and potentially all these like combat affecting things. Like, oh, it's like a super mega skill in many ways. And it didn't really jump out to me for that reason, because it felt like it was both encroaching on existing stuff and also leading with a reward output, which made me a little bit uneasy as well, because shamanism kind of tried to sell itself on this idea of like item augments and improving gear and equipment and tools and adding stats and special effects to things and being potentially quite a game-changing skill. And I totally get that was probably the thing that a lot of people who really like shamanism latched onto and thought was really exciting. It's like, oh, this is almost an old school version of what RS3 did a lot of with their divination invention combo of like augmenting and adding to existing stuff. But for me, I don't think that's what a skill should have been leading with. And it was quite odd to me that we had one of the three skills lead with a very strong outward reward output, whereas the other two were more just selling themselves on the concept and the idea of the themes and what you could potentially do with that, rather than saying any like specific reward. Because at the end of the day, if you really try to, you could tie basically any reward to any piece of content you want if you just shake up the theme of it. Like you could do augmenting items if it's something players desperately want with, in theory, any of those three skills. Like if you wanted a weird taming skill where it was all about creatures finding strange ancient items for you that you then add to your equipment to improve them, like, yeah, you could make that work if you wanted it to. Same with sailing, right? You go and find things sunk to the bottom of the ocean with specialized tools on your ship, and then that improves your gear. Like you could make that work for any skill concept. So for me, it's much more important that skill sells itself on what the skill is actually trying to do that's unique to it, and how it's going to like flesh out the world and offer more unique gameplay opportunities. And I do think taming and sailing were both a bit stronger in that regard. The one part of shamanism I did really like was the idea of having some interactions with the spirit realm and what that could mean. Is it this sort of mirror dimension of Gillinor itself and everything's a little bit twisted or backwards, or just ghostly and ethereal? That was quite cool, but it very quickly encroached on, again, just other things that we already have in game, like go and do some hunter or slayer to gather some creature bits or something, and then go and make some totems or things that look like they're crafting or fletching-y type skill interactions. And it was all just a bit muddy to me as to what shamanism was doing. Like, who are you as a shaman? Like, what does it mean to be a shaman? I don't think it was clear enough for my liking. So I know that's not a super popular take, because shamanism was very, very liked skill amongst a lot of people. And I mean, at the end of the day, it will be coming back up for discussions at some point, because Jagex basically just outright confirmed that. Like, they pretty much promised it, given the close poll outcome with sailing only just eking out above it, which is fine. So I'll look forward to seeing how that conversation eventually turns out and what version of shamanism we end up talking about in the future. But yeah, it wasn't, the one that was pitched wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. So overall, I think I'm quite happy that we got sailing. Now, obviously, I think sailing conceptually is probably the most challenging skill that they could have got.
Yeah.
And to try and implement, especially as a first skill. It's a double-edged sword, because obviously, I mean, something as unprecedented as a new skill in old school, maybe you want to start a bit easier, but at the same time, I think jumping in the deep end, quite literally in the case of sailing, getting access to the whole ocean, and everything that entails with ships and the infrastructure behind them, I think if they manage to nail this, which I am still confident about, we can get more into in a sec, then yeah, to me that's like, I don't know, the sky's the limit at that point. I think I think doing one of the most challenging and difficult things first is actually quite nice as a sort of way of proving themselves. So yeah, I'm looking forward to what sailing is still potentially going to be, and obviously it's come a long way already. And I was involved in some of the early stuff, putting out some, yeah, worked with Jagex, putting some infographics out during the whole refinement stage of sailing as well, which a lot of people saw. So I've had some, conversations with Jagex about different things on that front, and they've obviously put up dev blogs of different iterations of it that they've already gone through so far. And yeah, I can attest to the fact that they've really put in some hard work. I want to give them a lot of credit for how carefully they're taking that, and how actually, in a way, I think lucky we should find ourselves, because this isn't something they're trying to like rush out and just push the first version of into the game. Clearly, they've got a team and some team leaders and managers and whatnot who are actually giving them the time to actually the time to let them cook on this thing, right?
Yeah.
Like they're giving them the time to make this what it needs to be, and that's really, really reassuring to see that there's not like some big push towards getting out quickly. But yeah, just as a initial surface level take on that one, I think I liked taming and sailing. I would have been quite happy with both of them coming through, but I'm happy with sailing, and the trajectory it's taking so far is positive. Curious to know where you're kind of at on sailing at the minute, and where your thoughts were on those three as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you said. In fact, I think the way you saw shamanism is really interesting, and actually like that's kind of changed my perspective, because you're totally right. They were selling the reward space rather than the core concept. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're totally right. Yeah, I initially, when they proposed all three of them, I was team taming, and team taming did have that core thing that I was excited about. But then when they actually started getting into the proposal, they shied away so heavily off the impact of the skill. I mean, they didn't want this to impact you at all. It was almost like a separate thing that was going to have no implications with the rest of the game. And I think they did that because there's so much lingering fear of summoning and how game breaking it was. And that like was upsetting to me, because to be fair, I never actually engaged with summoning. I quit back in 2007, didn't come back to RuneScape until old school 2015. So
it wasn't great, I'll say that much.
Yeah. So there's that element of like, okay, taming sounds great. And, I was even thinking, I'm not a huge Pokemon fan, to be fair, but there is that kind of element of, having like a little Pokédex, and you're training your little animals, and they have their own levels, so you got like these leveling systems within a leveling system. I just think that would be really unique. And then maybe even being able to challenge your monsters against other monsters or pets or whatever they would be. But then again, there was a little bit of that convolution with pets already being in the game. Like, what are pets going to do? Are they going to be involved in taming in any way? And so, they really blundered in selling taming on the Q&A that they had shortly after that. So sailing was my next go-to, and that was the one that excited me most. Shamanism, it scared me, because that was also around the time where they were, I can't exactly remember the timeline, but it was somewhere around the time they were introducing ruinous powers and trying to get people really excited about a new prayer book. And ruinous powers, I mean, that we saw, I mean, again, in our minds, a new prayer book sounds super exciting and super essential, almost like, oh, of course we're going to need a new prayer book. We have new spell books, of course we need a new prayer book. But once you start getting into the nitty gritty, it's very, very complicated to balance a prayer book that's not going to just completely overtake another one. So, with shamanism, that seemed to me like a new prayer book, where the idea of it is so exciting, new upgrades, new auras, new abilities, new everything. And then you actually start getting into nitty gritty, and it's like, okay, this game is unrecognizable at this point, because and I always bring up the example of, you're now trolling your team if you don't go into top with your 3 auras on your new spirit staff after completing these 3 abilities on your daily spirit shamanistic ritual that you have to do every single time you want to do a raid, and then you have like these power-ups, and it would just become this real mess. And imagine on top of that, comboing it with ruinous powers or something. Just like, oh my God, like we are not playing old school anymore. Old school thrives off the simplicity Like, because
100%.
with simplicity you can add complexity to it, and I think you stand by that as well. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so yeah, I was really happy to go down the sailing route. And I mean, BC Guppy, those early BC Guppy casts, we just got so excited about sailing. And again, the fantasies that I create in my head are way more exciting than when you start, seeing the slow development of sailing. And but in my head, I'm thinking of all these amazing things you can do with it. And so my excitement for sailing, and now I guess we'll kind of start jumping into it. I'll just start off by saying my excitement for sailing it was at a very high level at the beginning because of the excitement and the fantasies I had in my mind of it. And then now I'm seeing it in a more real, like a realist sense, where I'm like, okay, this is a very difficult project to get right. And the first thing I'm noticing, and the first thing the team's working on, is movement. The movement of boats. I mean, that has to be captured so perfectly, or else the whole rest of the skill is just not going to feel right. And I'm at the point where I'm a bit more skeptical now, and I'm only skeptical because I'm trying to remain completely honest with my feelings about it. I don't want to be jaded. I don't want to delude myself into, just continually being hyped for something where I'm really not feeling it. But currently I'm in a state where I know the team is very dedicated to this, and they're taking it very seriously, and they're going to do everything they can to get it right. So that's my optimism. But the thing where I'm nervous of is them really being able to capture the movement of sailing. So let's dive in. What are your thoughts on movement in particular, and just sailing for like what we've seen right now with the blog? And for those listening, you are a part of the people that are working on sailing directly. You're working with the team and stuff. I don't know how much you can share about that, obviously under NDA and stuff, but just for people's awareness, you are involved in it directly.
Yeah, in terms of like giving feedback and whatnot. So yeah, I have had the privilege of being able to see a lot more of the inner workings, as it was, and a lot of the iterative prototyping that's been going on, and seeing the shift. And yeah, like I'll share the same or some similar thoughts to you, where it's very easy to get excited about a concept where you can fill in all the blanks with your imagination and everything would be the best thing it could possibly be, right, in your mind. And then the practical reality sets in. It's like, okay, how is this actually going to function? And that, when reality does set in, that can become more challenging to try and grapple with. I do think early on, like I'll be fully transparent, I guess, and say like some of the things that I've looked at and even play tested that Jaggers have already shared bits and pieces of in dev blogs. I think there was some quite recently as well, showing a few more iterations that they've done. Some of the early stuff was kind of it didn't immediately jump out to me. There's some concerns about levels of is there going to be too much micromanagement involved? I've seen a lot of players talk about that, like the ships, just like the physical act of moving a ship, and you're dealing with some like faff with like clicking on sails and moving around and entering and exiting different things, and is that going to feel satisfying? And honestly, like some of the early iterations I think were a little bit rough around the edges, to the point where maybe they weren't really hitting the mark. But having had the pleasure of seeing a lot of those iterations progress and go through so many, and again, just to really emphasize, like the old school team are so committed to taking on every bit of feedback that they can possibly get. And when the time comes when they're really going to throw the doors open and get the wider public involved, they're still going to be super keen to hear people's thoughts and trying to make the best thing they can. So that's been keeping me optimistic, especially seeing it and feeling it develop the way it has, because some of the more recent stuff that I've been able to check out has been moving in a really promising direction. And I'm personally, again, there's stuff that they've highlighted in recent dev blogs with how things might be functioning now, and some of that stuff is leaving me feeling very positive, I would say. Again, I'm skirting the line as to what exactly specifically I can and can't say now, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think, like, in all honesty, there were bits and pieces added quite recently where I would say, like, okay, this is like starting to look and feel like a skill to me, whereas before it was like a collection of stuff and tools and systems barely functioning, and more recently actually, and stuff that hopefully will be shared with people, more publicly in the not so distant future. Yeah, it's stuff that's getting me excited again about the sailing being a skill, because I think there's still skepticism surrounding that, just in general, right? Like, can sailing still feel like a skill and not some mini game, whatever, blah blah blah, dungeoneering at sea? Lots of criticism have been shared over the years, which I don't think really holds much weight when you actually see what they've got and the direction they're going with it. So I'm pretty optimistic about it. There have been bits and pieces where I've not liked everything that they've been doing, and bits and pieces where I've really liked stuff. So it's gone through that like iterative development and so many different prototypes to get where it is already now. I know it's taken a while. If to share, I'd echo people's perhaps disappointment, I suppose, in the length of time that it's taken. But at the same time, I think that's coming from me at least, a position of fairly ignorant when it comes to game development and the challenges that surround that thing, right? And as I said earlier, like, I think I've got to try and look at it in a way that's should be so glad that we've got a team that has been afforded the time to actually get this right, and they're not trying to rush it. Because I think even with the with the old school team in general, like, if we had to roll back the clocks, I don't know, X number of years, I don't think the team would have been in that kind of spot to be able to like afford the time to do that and still have lots of big exciting content releases that we're still getting. So I think we're in like the best position the game's ever been in, and the team's in the best position it's ever been in order to actually deliver something like this, which is really, really promising to me. And yeah, just knowing the devs as well are like some of the just most talented people, and they're so I can't sing their praises enough. Getting to like see them and interact with them as people, right, as human beings, which they are. They're not just mindless drones working for your pleasure. It's like they've got lives. They're doing the best they can, and they're doing a really good job of it, I think, overall. So like in terms of the core, where sailing is heading in the minute, and I'm speaking a little bit vaguely overall, but hopefully it will become clear in the months to come. I'm feeling very confident personally.
That's so good to hear, because I would trust your feelings on it. I mean, because you've been outspoken about, like even just earlier in this discussion, you're not satisfied with where Sae is at, and you wouldn't. Yeah. You're honest enough to just admit, like, okay, like there's some failings that we've seen over the years, and so that's a good thing to see. And you said that like soon we're gonna see that publicly shared. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think hopefully. Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't really be saying too much more, but I think like at some point before the end of the year, there's probably going to be some more sailing news. I don't think that would be groundbreaking to reveal. So,
what are your thoughts in particular about? Oh, well, one thing I want to say is I also want to just agree with you on the devs. I mean, they're just amazing. They're amazing people, and their passion is so contagious. I mean, they just, even having Arcane and Husky on recently, I mean, it's been years since they've been working, and they live and breathe the OSRS seemingly, and like they still care so much, and they want to get it right, and they care about the game's health and everything. So I think we're in a good position. One thing I want to ask is what your thoughts are on giving updates on sailing, and is that a net positive, or do you see there being potential downsides to sharing an unfinished product without, because you're sharing something where all they're seeing is one snapshot of what's been happening, and there is a huge backlog of things that they're really working on, but they just can't show it. And so the devs in their eyes, they're saying like, okay, there's so much coming together right now, but we're sharing this one thing, and the community hasn't heard anything in months, and now they see one little thing and they're like, what the hell is happening? What are your thoughts on the devs sharing things like that? You think it's important to keep that transparency going, and what are the pitfalls of that?
Yeah, it's so difficult for them to thread the needle on that one, because I think they're both stuck between a rock and a hard place of being, in some cases, giving too much information, and others, as you say, giving not enough for long periods of time. Like last year during the the early pre-production and the concepting stages, when sailing entered into refinement as the selected skill, and then there were essentially 4 or 5 big meaty dev blogs and accompanying videos and infographics and things trying to break it down. as much as possible to give the players as much information as possible. But even then, that's a really tall order to expect the average player to consume all of that and then retain that information and understand it, right? It's a lot. And so, as I say, it's really difficult for them to know, like, it would be great if they could just talk about everything all the time and share every single thing they've done, like every other week. Just say, hey, we've done this much stuff and here's all the systems and everything where it's currently at. But I think that would very quickly become horrifically overwhelming, because I think we already see bits and pieces of like dev blog and polling fatigue at times, where players get a little bit inundated with too much stuff to have to read and digest and become a little bit jaded or just like not interested in engaging with it as a result of that. So I think there is very much a case of they could overdo it, and maybe even the refinement process last year did a little bit in a sense. But yeah, again, the opposite end of that spectrum is leaving it too long. It makes people wonder, like, what's going on? Like, you've been silent for X number of months. Like, is stuff okay? Most of the time it is. It's just, sadly, things can take a long time to go through a lot of different departments and their teams, and going through, when it is such an iterative style of project, that's where sailing is very different, I think, from the average project that the old school team would take on, where usually, even as early as like concepting and pre-production stages, that have a pretty clear idea of what the end goal is going to look like and what the piece of content they want to mold and shape is going to be doing, because it's all going to be adhering to a similar set of systems. Whereas this is less so that, because they're sort of creating the systems itself, and that's quite unusual, and that I think needs to have that time. But then obviously it's not as flashy and exciting to give updates when it's like, yeah, we've spent the last whatever month or two trying all these different systems out and weighing up their pros and cons and the merits and whatnot. So it's difficult in terms of giving the players that information or not. I'm not even sure where that sweet spot lies between the two, of, you know, giving enough information so players feel informed and up to date without overdoing it and making people feel a bit fatigued from it all. In terms of going forward, especially for like playtesting and showing people early prototype footage, I think that is one where I would also feel concerned on the old school team's behalf. Man, at the risk of sounding a tad bit condescending to the wider player base, apologies everyone in the player base already in advance here, but I think based on what I've seen, it's definitely the case that I think a lot of people, no matter how many disclaimers you put up, no matter how much information you try to give, there will be a good chunk of people who just have no interest in knowing about or understanding what the development cycle of any kind of game-related project looks like. And so what they see, they will take at face value and then judge it at face value. And that can be quite damaging to something that's very heavily work in progress, and basically everything is still possibly subject to change. So I do think there are some, like, I definitely would have concerns about, putting out a big, when they do get around to it eventually, a big open technical alpha playtest, especially if they want to focus more on, hey, do these core systems feel good? Whether people will go into that with the assumption of, oh, look, here's Jagex beta testing the sailing skill. Let's go see what the sailing skill is like. And it's like, oh, this is crap. It's like, yeah, well, it's not the sailing skill yet, right? And I think my worry is I don't know what percentage of the players fall into that category. Hopefully not too many, but at the same time, I've definitely read enough comments that it causes me some concern, where I don't know if, that in and of itself, just sharing things in too early and raw a stage and unfinished, can in and of itself be quite damaging if people really heavily judge that as a presumed finished product, even though it very clearly wouldn't be. But I don't know what the best way of tackling that even is, or how you do it, because again, you could put 1,000,001 disclaimers and people will still click through things and ignore and just sometimes assume the worst. I think because the conversation of sailing and new skills in general is already such a heated one and quite controversial, and there are some people who are coming into it with just basically they're just looking to be almost annoyed, right? Like they don't like it and they don't want to like it, if that makes right. Like they've already made their decision, and that's a shame. I think if there are people who are not willing to engage in the conversation anymore, even, and are just looking for every opportunity to shut it down, I think that's really damaging. Because at the end of the day, when you've got the opportunity as a player in particular to sort of help shape and form something and push something in a more positive direction, then man, you should try and like capitalize on that. I feel like, right? Like it's such an unprecedented thing that we even have in old school as a community and as a game, where we can absolutely help mold the game into something better if we just give constructive criticism and feedback that isn't just, I hate this, I hate you, you should be fired, go away, right? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't do anything good. That doesn't make the game better. It doesn't make your experience better.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people who have very valid criticisms of something like sailing, and it would be great if some of those criticisms could be shared in a more constructive capacity with the intention of trying to offer up improvements and different directions that it could take in order to make it be the thing that they would be more, or the things that people would find more appealing, right? If you're not currently liking what it is. But anyway, so that went into a bit of a weird rant at the end there, I think. I'm not sure if that made sense.
No, it did. And, you know, a lot of the time it's tough because, I mean, me and you both, I think, are in a little bit more privileged positions, at least in regards to, you know, just having a say in this game. I mean,
yeah,
I'm blessed to have the opportunity to talk to JMods and talk to players and, you know, have an audience that listens to ideas of mine. And, you know, you directly working on, you know, sailing with the team, and, you know, you do have these says. And I think there is just a lot of players that feel like their ideas and their wants and desires for this game are just unheard. And no matter what they do, it's just not going to be heard. So they almost have to overcompensate. And the way they overcompensate is just by being as loud and obnoxious as possible, because it does get the attention of people. And so instead of writing a well-crafted, constructive thing, it's, you know, what is that really going to capture? You know, it actually would capture people's attention, because I don't think they understand how much the devs actually do care and how much they actually do value that criticism. But I think in their heads, they just say, okay, I have to overcompensate the fact that I don't want sailing, even though I maybe could give some constructive criticism on why I don't. I'm going to just yell, because it's easier for me to just yell at this point. It's easier for me to just make it a very simple statement that we don't want this or whatever. And I do have a little bit of empathy for not the people that are, you know, personally attacking any others, but people that feel the need to just say no without any justification or anything like that. Just maybe they just don't feel as heard. And you're right, though. I mean, it's tough, and the team does want constructive criticism, and constructive criticism really is the way to go to make the game healthier ultimately. There is, I mean, even the people that don't even say anything, there are just some players that do not want a new skill, and they have their reasons for it. And just the simple fact that we are going down the route of getting a new skill, they don't want any part of it. So it's like that is their constructive criticism is, I don't want a new skill in this game. And I've already said my reasons why, because it's not, you know, in their heads old school. So now the discussion is closed, because if they do offer constructive criticism, that basically means, okay, now I actually am in favor of having a new skill. And so they just continually double down on no, like no matter what, do not bring it out. So it's tough, and we got a huge player base to cater to.
Yeah, a few points just to like follow up on a few of your points there. Like, in no particular order. Like on the topic of like people, very feeling like they have to be larger and louder than to get their voice heard, right? And just shouting from the rooftops, no, I hate this, blah blah blah. I promise you, well, some of that might get seen. I absolutely promise you, it is not gonna be positive. Like it's not gonna do anything, right? Like even if some old school team members are seeing that, I assure you that all that's really doing is sadly putting you in a category of people who are like, oh, we can just ignore this person because they're just shouting, and it's just noise, right? You're just contributing noise. So as much as it might be nice on a personal level to want to vent, I would strongly recommend against it, because your voice will be heard more if you are constructive. And I'd point to myself at that when I say, like, I totally agree. Like we are, like the two of us and a few others out there in a privileged position, but at the same time, like I am a nobody. Like I'm genuinely a nobody. I made a post on Reddit 8.5 years ago because I didn't like something. But what I didn't do was just shout into the void, right? Yeah. I looked at what I didn't like, and then I was like, okay, this is what I would like. This is the reasons why I don't like what is currently there, and this is my reasons for why I think this might be better. And that then generated a conversation. And then doing that for over a sustained period, guess what? It turns out when you treat human beings like human beings with empathy, they actually want to interact with you. And I've had that. That's where those doors have opened for me. And I've had that really lucky, privileged position of being able to like communicate directly with the old school team and work directly with them on certain things. So I promise you, like to everyone listening out there who feels like their voice isn't being heard, like it is when you're being constructive. It really is, and it can lead to amazing things. And I feel like I should be proof of that, right? I am a nobody. I'm no way significant in the grand scheme of this game of noteworthy accomplishment or content creation or anything. I just have shared thoughts in a hopefully, I hope, mostly respectful and constructive way.
Yes.
And that's, you know, people have, well, the old school team have responded to that, as have some of the wider community. Yeah, I think those are the main points.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And it's true. I mean, you're not the only one either. I mean, there's the handful of people that have come out of the woodworks and have just really created, you know, just offered something very valuable, whether it just be insight or just some creative post, and that really does lead to some amazing change in the game. So I totally agree. Yeah.
And on that last point as well, because you did mention, you know, there is absolutely, there's a group of people who don't want a new skill, and that's a really difficult one to approach as well in a game like this, where at the end of the day it's kind of a majority rules system, right? If the majority wants something, then that's what we're doing essentially because of the polling system. So I really sympathize, just like you did, with people who just don't want something and they don't really have a justification for it other than I just don't like this, I just don't want to see this kind of thing. The only thing I would say to that is I'd say take a step back and be like, right, would that line of thought work like on a game-wide level, right? If you just say I don't like this type of thing, therefore we should never get that in the game at all and nobody should experience that, right? If someone comes out and says I hate bosses, so we should just never have new bosses, like that should not be a thing, would that make sense to do? I don't think so. Would that leave the game in a better spot? No, I don't think it would. And even if you break it down in a more granular capacity, because that's what skills as a conversation suffer from greatly as well, where sailing specifically, maybe some people do like the idea of a new skill or could be won over by it, but sailing is just not the skill for them. It's just they just don't like it. Like, I don't like the idea of being on a ship. I don't want to be a sailor. It's like, cool. I think that is actually a really valid thing to say as well. Like you're allowed to just hold that opinion. Yeah. I think being a pirate is dumb. Cool. Yeah, that's okay. But at the same time, if we approached every other piece of content like that, we literally wouldn't get content, right? Like if every quest that was ever presented could have enough people saying, well, I just don't like elves. I don't like Turanwin as a region, so I just don't want to ever see an elf quest, please. We should only do a dwarf quest. But then enough people are like, well, no, I don't want to see Keldgrim expanded. That's boring. So we should only ever do like a desert quest. Like we would have never had a new quest ever.
Yep.
Right? Like we all just held on to our own personal biases and selfish desires for the one type of thing we like. So it is sadly a big case of just give and take in a game like old school. Like you've got to make concessions in order to have anything. And if we can acknowledge the fact that at the end of the day, like over 80% of people did want a new skill, and a super majority of that still, like over 70, whatever it was, 71, 72% wanted sailing. Like at the end of the day, that's a very, very strong margin of people. Like you don't want to ever discount all the people who don't want it. And I hope the old school team do continue listening to them, because I think there are, again, really valid responses to get, and it's worthwhile trying to win those people over still, right? Trying to mold the skill into what they want, which is, again, why I would stress to all those people, if this is you out there and you're like, I really don't want sailing, please do get involved anytime you can in a way that is really constructive and like offer up really thoughtful reasons why you don't like something, not just on a ideological level, but like come out with specifics to try and help mold it at least slightly in a direction that you would like more than what you might otherwise get if you just say nothing and keep saying, I hate the whole thing. Because that's nothing can be improved at that point in time. If we've accepted that this is a direction we're going in, which we essentially have already, then try and mold that in the most positive way you can, because you do have the power to do that as individuals in a community. So I would say wield that power for good if you can.
I want to ask about the thing that just over the past few weeks you said has kind of reinvigorated your excitement for sailing. Was there anything in particular that you do feel like you can share that has kind of helped, open your eyes to, okay, this is starting to really feel like a skill? Is there anything in particular, or is there, most of this do you have to like keep under wraps for now?
Yeah, I guess I'll see how close I can skirt to the edge of the Jagex lawyers getting out their sniper rifles, whatever. But yeah, I think no, for the most part, it's things that have been discussed in the past. Like what I think a lot of people have been worried about in general with sailing is that identity of like where does it start feeling like a skill? Like is it just mooching about on a boat on the ocean? Like am I micromanaging, clicking stuff? Like what does that actually look like in terms of skill-based stuff? And there was a list of things, like even as far back as last year during the early refinement stages, talking about sort of breaking it down into like core gameplay loops of interacting with stuff on your ship, generating little XP drops for sailing, but then these primary gameplay options where you can do different types of stuff. And it's some of those things that I think the Old School team have already shared some bits and pieces of, and little work in progress screenshots and whatnot, I think, at different points in time. And it's seeing some of that come together and getting to experience some of that, where there were a few things there where it's like, okay, for me, this is where I can see and feel the skill element of it, and the bits of sailing that I was personally excited about, right? Like if we go back to what we both said about the imagination of it very early on being the really alluring thing. And for me, some of that is kind of wrapped up in this idea of discovery and being able to go out and look at the oceans and find little different bits and pieces and seeing cool stuff out there that you can interact with, and some of that gaining sailing XP, but then also having some things that are quite laid back and low intensity that you can do that really feels like a traditional skilling interaction of just clicking on a tree and watching your chop, or clicking on an anvil and watching your smith. Like there are things like that in sailing already that exist, that capture that satisfying and simplistic laid back gameplay loop, as well as some of the more lean forward stuff. Plus, again, the thing that really excites me is some of the little Easter egg filled sense of discovery and going out and charting different bits of the oceans. And yeah, there's an exciting collection of things, even though it is still very early days and there's still a lot of work to still be done. And again, they'll be talking more about this in the future, but yeah, there's stuff there where for me it was like, I can see a picture starting to form now, and that was very, very exciting for me personally, because it was doing things that I wanted to see it do, and it's starting to do them. So yeah.
One of my concerns is and it's been my concern for a while, is the land masses. And I think the team has decided to not change any land masses, but keep everything the way it's been. Is that still the case? And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, the boats seem pretty large. I think, at least under what I remember is that, they're trying to keep the boats maybe not as grandiose as they had originally kind of envisioned. They're going to keep them a little bit more contained. But are you worried about potentially just the water feeling really limited? I mean, until you go out to the deep ocean, I imagine, but like just those little areas where it's just like these little streams that can't fit a boat. And then, well, I'll ask you that first. Like, what are your thoughts?
Cool. Yeah. I think initially I definitely was a bit concerned. I think it's very easy to look at that bit of the map, basically just the whole Southern Ocean area, everything that's like around Karamja pretty much is like, this is all very close together. Is this going to work well? And I think with some of the early incarnations, like you mentioned, the ships were quite big. They definitely were. They were too big. Again, that was some of my personal first pieces of feedback I ever gave to them, testing like an early version. I was like, these ships are way too big. I almost can't see the screen. It's just a ship. And I might as well just confirm it at this point. It's like they've definitely scaled down the ships significantly, and they feel much, much nicer as a result of that. So they're already kind of being brought down in scale to feel better with the surroundings. And I think with the way that the boats are scaled at the minute, and the way that I think a big part of it will be kind of content distribution, essentially, like how a player is kind of ushered through some of these ocean zones and when they get to different places and how long they'll be there. I think that's what's going to make the biggest impact with regards to like, does this feel too close together? Does it feel too compact and tight? And I'm hoping it won't. Right? I'm not going to say with absolute definitive certainty at this stage still, but I think at the end of the day, when weighing up the pros and cons of what the team said would it be involved if they wanted to try and move land masses, like it is doable for them. They can technically do it, but it's sadly such a huge undertaking in terms of additional dev time and QA and everything, because everything in the game is built off of like a coordinate system. So as soon as you move a chunk of stuff, I think they actually can technically move whole map squares relatively easily by essentially just like saving out a different file name, saying this map square should be down here now. So as long as I don't want to change anything in the map square itself, if they're just moving a full map square, then they can do that. But then everything in that map square basically breaks. That's like linked to something else. So they've got to go through every single piece of content in every single map square and like redo all of it to make sure it all hits the right coordinates and everything works again, and playtest, and no quest is broken, and no diary is broken, and no clue scroll is broken, and no boss is broken. It's like, then multiply that for everything, and it's like they would basically be spending the same amount of time they would be spending on the actual sailing skill itself on just landmass maintenance, essentially. And so from that perspective, I totally get why that just wouldn't be a really significant consideration. I know they have moved some very small bits of it, which they kind of talked about they wanted to do before, just to make a little bit of the early game zone a bit more accessible. Like, guess I can just outright say, because they did mention this in an early dev blog, that they were going to try at least of moving like Temperos in that area to make more of like a natural storm-like area that's a bit further south towards the closer to like the desert coast, I guess, where you actually leave the boat to get to it, rather than where it is currently situated on the map, which in the grand scheme of things you don't really see where it is in relation to everything else right now, because you're just on a dock 1 second and then on the Temperos Island another. You don't really have the context for what it's surrounding, but it's very close to the north bit of Karamja at the minute. But that has cleared up a bit of space, and I think that makes a logical bit of breathing room there, and there's some other stuff in its place perhaps that will be interesting for people to go and discover for themselves. So yeah, well, they're not moving those big land masses. I totally get why, and I do, again, I'm willing to trust the better judgment of the old school team on that one, and I think with, again, like the ship's scale and the size of them being what they are now, I don't think it's going to be as deeply problematic. I think you're going to have some quirks and some weirdness when it comes to like sailing by in Trana, but I think at the end of the day we might just have to chalk that up to, old school is a bit funky like that. Like, we walk up a mountain and down it in about 5 seconds. Like, that's just that's the game, right? Like, we just sort of have to accept the game is really weirdly scaled, and to the point of just not being scaled. You have mountains the size of buildings and vice versa, and it's maybe there's something charming to that, but again, that's the main problem points I think are that southern area all around Karamja to Intrana. But as soon as you get out a bit, in the maybe what might be some mid to higher level sailing opportunities out in the southern oceans and the deep, just where they've got big open ocean space to play around with, I think that's where things could get very, very exciting in terms of new stuff they could do, and the skill feeling much more free and open for exploration and just gameplay purposes.
I guess the last point on that I want to ask is just the stacking, so like you can be underneath somebody when you're walking and running and stuff, but is that going to be the same case with boats? And have there been any play tests of boats stacking underneath? Like, how jarring does it look, and is that the case where you can't be under, or where you can freely go under other people's boats? Like, how is that going to work out? Do you think that's going to be just a charming clunky thing, or
I think so I think there isn't going to be any sort of hard blocking preventing two-player ships from intersecting, because you kind of just have to, right? Just like you have to let player characters overlap and all share the same game tile, just for very practical purposes.
Just actually gatekeeping areas.
That would be so funny if you could do that. I mean, maybe that would be a cool piece of content in of itself, though, right? Like, if ships had blocking in a certain place, you could create actual barricades and
you need to cannon them down with your clan. Like, we got to take these guys out.
That would be actual fun bit of gameplay. But for practical purposes, wouldn't be ideal if you could just lock in noobs to Port Sarim. It's like, pay the troll toll if you want to leave. So no, I think they're going to let ships kind of be traversable through in that regard. And in terms of like how many, I think they both have, whether they've said it's public or not, I'm not even sure, but I think they want to do a proper, as you could imagine they would want to do, they'd want to do like a stress test to make sure the servers can handle like lots of different ships and players doing all sorts of things. So I imagine that will be taking place at some point in the future, right? So they can start to get a better idea of what this infrastructure is looking like. And I think just as also what happens right now with player characters, when there are too many in a single area, like, it starts to de-render people, right? And it sort of holds a lot of player assets, so you only see a smaller and smaller number of players like around or closest to your player character. And I think they're going to have to just do something similar with ships, but probably just with an even more strict limit, just for, again, completely practical purposes. While a player character is only one tile big, you can get away with having quite a lot of people around before you have to start doing that. But when you've got a ship that's multiple tiles big with multiple players on a ship, you probably got to be a bit more strict with how many of those ships will be rendered. at any given time. So yeah, I think that's how they're going to kind of try and deal with the crowding and overlapping issues and whatnot, and try and limit the total number of people that are kind of visible in an area by being careful with rendering, and then making sure the tech can handle it with some in-depth stress testing at some point. And yeah, hopefully that works out okay. I think that's, well, it sounds like the only course of action that would make sense to me anyway. I don't think there's any way you could let it just, I'm trying to imagine what an ocean would look like if you just let 1,000 player ships all just mull about on the same like few game tiles. That would be absolute. I mean, it would be very interesting to see, but I don't think it would make for good gameplay. So yeah. I think they're going to have to put some sort of artificial limit on that one just to keep things playable.
Okay, we're going to kind of stray away from sailing for a bit, and I want to ask you about plugins. If you have any just certain thoughts on just how far we've come with RuneLite plugins. I mean, we really can never go back to not having plugins. I mean, we were basically at that point several years back as well, but nowadays it's just like, I mean, even I'm excited about Jagex finally introducing some very valuable plugins to the mobile client and their own client. One of them being menu entry swapper. That is just so essential these days, I feel like. In fact, before I let you answer, I mean, I remember asking this to my Twitch stream. I would ask, like, if you could only have one RuneLite plugin to have, like, what would you keep, basically? And a lot of people are like, oh, I'd probably choose GPU, or I would choose ground items, or I'd choose this. Mine was menu entry swapper by a mile. I mean, menu entry swapper is just, when you really take advantage of it, it is so game changing. I mean, now, don't get me wrong, if I only had one plugin, it would still be a miserable experience in a lot of ways, but that alone, I think, is the biggest quality of life, in my opinion. So basically, I want to gauge your thoughts on plugins, how far we've come. Have we crossed any lines in particular that you've seen? Do you think that it's a positive to the game? Do you think there are some limits that we should be aware of going forward? And so let's get into it.
I think, well, I guess to start with, I think we definitely have crossed a number of thresholds of sorts. Like we've certainly completely opened Pandora's box, and that is not ever being shut again, as evidenced now by the fact that Jagex are finally going ahead with their own kind of public API that they can use for plugins, hopefully at some point in the not so distant future, in their official client and mobile as well. So yeah, clearly, like we've gone far enough that we can't ever really go back now, which I think is fine by and large. I think I remember back early on, like in the early days of old school, I was quite staunchly maybe even like anti-plugin or just like anti-third-party client, though I think some of that might have been swayed by the original popular client that may or may not have charged people money to use it. And I thought that was always very sketchy and never liked it. So I never engaged with that whatsoever. But yeah, clearly a lot of people did, and then it built up a whole economy surrounding just that and an ecosystem of new third-party clients coming out and bigger and more impactful things affecting the game. And then Jagex kind of coming at it basically just all too late, as it were. Like they let that run absolute wild and then couldn't ever get it constrained again. And then when they tried with both RuneLite and 117 HD, both times they handled that pretty shockingly badly. In hindsight, trying to like shut those down when they were just far too far along for the players to ever be willing to do that. So I'm glad that the team at this point is now in its position and they have that right leadership team that can see the benefits of what these things have done and actually embrace it and embrace the players and embrace it internally. I think that's all positive. But yeah, in terms of like individual interactions, it's difficult to say sometimes, because I know for a fact if I were to try and go back and play in like a completely vanilla plain client environment again, I think I'd find it so difficult. I think I'd very quickly realize how many crutches I'm using, just nice little brightly colored pop-ups and things telling me what to click and stuff that has just become almost like a part of the fabric of the game now, that I almost forget are plugins practically, that they become so at home. So I don't know whether that's like a good thing or a bad thing. I think in some cases it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's kind of inevitable, especially for a game as old as old school now, and for players who are familiar enough with it and know how to use it. I think it's wanting to squeeze out every little optimization and really play as efficiently as they can. When you've got a game that almost encourages people to play efficiently like this, I think they're inevitably going to try and find ways of hyper efficiently playing and doing everything they can. And yeah, there are definitely some things that I think go a little bit far where you can be, especially if it's not plugins you're using, but you see someone else watching it, or maybe there's like a content creator or a streamer or someone, and then there are certain things going on the screen that just make it a little bit visually unappealing at times. I think that can be a bit jarring, a bit striking. It's like, ooh, we're straying into territory where we're diminishing the game part of the game and really treating it like a numerical series of values and exchanges taking place. And it's, I don't know, it gets into a weird spot. I don't know. Again, I don't know where exactly the line in the sand for that really is, but when there's just like a lot of stuff on screen happening that's like changing the fundamentals of what should be just looking at the game flowing in a nice natural way, and then there are just things happening that are not like that, it becomes a bit, I don't know, a bit odd. But I think overall it is by and large a positive thing for the game to have had. I think the players having the level of input and control over it has genuinely led to a better game in the long run. I think we are in a better spot with third-party clients and all the plugins than if we had been without them. So yeah. I think overall I'd say I'm feeling much more positive than would be anything else. But there are still times when I'll pause and think and look at the screen and too many things on the screen and be like, I should toggle off some plugins, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on the, I've seen some streams where it looks like a circus. Like, well, what is happening?
Yeah.
Like, everything's rainbow. There's just highlighting everything in your inventory and in the game. And it gets pretty bizarre, but those are just what's going to happen when you just have thousands and thousands of plugins. And I think the best thing about having gone down this route of allowing plugins and where we're at now is just how quickly the turnover rate is. I mean, it's like you have an update come out or a quest or anything, and it's just like within hours we got plugins for it. I mean, it's just boom, there you go. And then quest helpers just sped up so quick too. I mean, now all the Varlamore 2 quests have the quest helper already there. Yeah. And that's another discussion we could have about quest helper. I think one of the people I really wanted to ask about quest helper was Mod Ed, and I talked to him last year about it. I'm like, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're the lore guy. Do you feel like your quests, all the work that goes into them with you and the team is getting devalued by these quest helpers? And he actually had a really nuanced view, and he's like, no, in fact, it's actually for him on the lore side of things, he actually really enjoys it because he recognizes that many players the questing becomes a chore because it becomes kind of complicated. But with the quest helper, you actually are able to focus just on the storyline if you care to. And you don't have to worry about bringing all the items and looking up, what all this other stuff is and having to solve these puzzles. You really get to focus on the lore side of things, and he really enjoys it. And I've always been a spacebar quester. Unfortunately, I know that's not kind of awful to admit to some players. I imagine you love the lore, and I do like the lore. I think that the brain rot of efficiency it's not even that. It's just like there's something I'd rather be doing than doing a quest, and so I just want to get through it, and that's the
No, I totally get that. I think I would again. Quest helper is one that I was going to say I don't use it. Like I do use it, but it's a specific use where I've never used quest helper to complete a new quest for the first time. Like since Old School came out, like I've always wanted to do every single quest that Old School releases like by myself, because to me that is, again, I guess more so on the other end of the spectrum to you. I am in that niche audience of people who I adore what quests represent, because they are these little self-contained pieces of everything that games can be. It's the coming together of the storytelling with the narrative, the gameplay, the audio visual, everything that make games what they are. I think a quest encapsulates them all perfectly and have these fun one and done self-contained experiences that you then can't re-experience for the first time ever again, right? It's not like a boss or a skilling activity that's built to be repeated. These quests are built to be like enjoyed and excited and wowed and shocked and surprised and everything. So I love that. I love getting that experience for the first time. But then if I'm like running through an extra an Iron Man or in a league or something like that, it's like quest helper's coming on and I'm spacebarring through it, because that's like the purpose of that particular gameplay session is not I don't want to absorb the lore and take it in because I've already done that. Like I know what the story is and I know what the outcome is, so that changes things for me. So I think Quest Salver is a really valuable addition to the game for that reason as well, where we can acknowledge that a lot of people are replaying the game many times over because of different accounts and different modes and seasonal things like that. So I think it warrants its existence, and I don't oppose it, even though I don't use it for like new quest experiences, because I adore those precious moments when you get to play through a quest for the first time, because you can't really repeat that.
Yeah, no, that's also a great insight, because you're right. A lot of people do play multiple accounts, and the last thing they want to do is just go through all that headache of stuff again without the helper. I'm surprised that when it was first released, that Jagex didn't have a strong view on like being against it. But so that's the nicest thing about plugins over the years. It's basically open. It's almost been like an enlightenment journey of like, okay, we have got to test all these things, because if plugins had been banned, for example, or third-party clients had been banned, we would be living in the dark ages still with, I mean, just, dude, I remember for years, it was like 2 straight years of Jagex being against left-click pickpocketing things. Like, it just, you know, it was a rule. I mean, there was a specific rule that you were not allowed to change the menu swaps of certain NPCs. So, like, literally for years, I had to right-click every single Vire I wanted to pickpocket, and right-click every single elf I wanted to pickpocket to get these valuable things that on an Iron Man seemed to be like endless chores. And it was agony. I mean, just pure agony. This is so bad. And I think because we've just had this downpouring of plugins and people actually seeing how nice so much of this is, it's finally opened the eyes to most of the devs and just the game as a whole to see, okay. I mean, because now we live in the day where everything can be menu swapped, and I think that is so brilliant. I just think menu swapping is so key to the flow of this game. I mean, it just feels so good to be able to fully customize what things are left clickable. I think it's just brilliant. And, you know, I think that's the one I really focus on most, but there's so many other ones that, you know, I could just start listing that are just so key to having this game feel really good. And so I'm so happy we're in the state where we're at. And I think in a lot of people's eyes, including my own for a time, I always wished that there wasn't a third-party client, but rather an official client with all the essential plugins that are good. So then there's no cheating plugins. There's no people taking advantage of certain things where they're getting a huge advantage somewhere in like a raid or something. And so everyone's on this equal playing field. The problem is, though, is as soon as you limit it to just Jagex having full control over it, then things don't get updated and things break, and then they don't get fixed for months and months. But when it's a player project, just every player can get involved in it, things are fixed quickly, things are updated quickly, and if you want something, somebody can make it quickly, and it's so good. So that's a really fantastic point, I think, to bring up, and one I would emphasize again, like of the idea of this being community driven and what that actually represents, because it's very rare, again, within any game or anything like this, where the players have a degree of control, even if it's not much control, over the overall course and direction of things in terms of what we can actually do and accomplish within the game, and from a tech perspective as well, and gameplay. But we do, and we've sort of helped steer the flow of things a little bit as well. And I mean, again, in an ideal world as well, like good plugins should also, if they're suitable for the game, should be perhaps highlighting flaws within the game itself, right? Like maybe certain things that plugin's doing should actually just be default functions, and that's a good way of highlighting where systemic issues exist within just poor elements of game design from many, many, many years ago. So I think that can be seen as a positive for it too. But yeah, when it comes to the players being the driving force, I think that's something that we should all be very conscious of and aware of, especially moving forward. I mean, it's fantastic. I cannot overstate how great it is that Jagex are trying to make their own proper official client with really robust feature sets in them, and as I say, getting their own player plugin hub and API accessible to people, and their own like HD options and all sorts of things. That's all really exciting. I hope they keep committing to that. But I also hope we as players understand that the only reason they're doing any of that is because we as a community did it first, right? Like we forced their hand effectively.
they are responding to the market that we generated.
Yep.
And that's a really powerful thing when you acknowledge that all the good that Jagex are doing comes as a direct result of what we've done, right? It's very telling. We can look at RS3 over there on the other side of the fence, and they don't have any kind of plugin system. They don't have any additional clients. They don't have options that players can customize to the same degree. Like, we have a lot of really amazing things here that Jagex have essentially had to kind of capitulate to because we did them first as a community. And I think we should just be, again, I don't want to be too adversarial against Jagex on this front, but I think we as a community should be quite just careful and conscious of what the future looks like if we start moving towards a direction where Jagex try to call people over to their client and give up the third-party ones. In principle, I'd love for that to be the case, and for Jagex to have a client that is so good that you want to just willingly migrate to it. But just, I think we should all keep in the back of our mind the reason why that is as good as it is, and all the things you just mentioned, right? Of when the players have a degree of control over something, things can happen very quickly, and there's always going to be enough people in the community that are passionate and talented enough to want to do something for themselves just for the love of it and to provide and contribute to the game. And that, for that to continue being the case, we're going to need to have some third-party things continuing to exist, like your rune lights. So yeah, if it ever does become completely consolidated and internal within a Jagex operated and owned ecosystem, you know, just again, I'd just urge a little bit of caution there for all to be aware of, right? Like, what happens if Jagex gain control over it one day and they decide, maybe we don't want third-party clients anymore because our client is good enough now. And then what if the long-term future of that is, well, they don't want to dedicate the resources to maintaining a player plugin hub the same way that we collectively can, right? Because if someone, you know, I mean, you've got like Adam, I guess, who oversees RuneLight, and a bunch of people who contribute to it. As much as I don't want to diminish at all any of their input, because it's so valuable and they've been so amazing. But at the end of the day, you know, it's still people in a line of things that have occurred in Old School's life, of people who've been passionate enough to want to do something. And I'm fully certain that if people ever wanted to like take a step back, other people would try and step in to pick up the slack. But that becomes much more difficult if everything is in just Jagex's ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That I don't want to sound too like.
No, you're totally right.
I don't want to be antagonistic about Jagex. So I really want them to keep committing to what they're doing. I think it's fantastic, but just bear in mind why they're doing it. They're doing it because we did it first, and they're trying to respond and compete in a market that we've created, right? Like, competition breeds that degree of kind of positive options that we get to choose from, which is a good thing. But we should just be skeptical if we ever start losing those choices.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Now I have to bring up Project Zanaris. How much do you know about that coming out next? I believe it's next year. They're really kind of trying to roll things out.
Yeah, possibly.
That you know what? Let me hear your thoughts on that entirely, and maybe you can even just, for those that maybe aren't as familiar with it, if you could just like recap kind of what it is.
Yeah. So Project Zanaris, I guess, essentially, in the shortest terms possible, are community run and operated servers, essentially akin to an officially sanctioned private server where a player can run a server with a custom set of rules or systems that is separate and detached from the main game. So that obviously opens up a huge amount of questions and doors of possibilities there as to what that could mean and lead to. I know there's been some, I guess there's maybe a mixed response overall. I'm not sure what to say, what the wider community reception has been to it. I think I've seen some positivity, but also some apprehension, and again, rightly so. I think some of the biggest points of concern there are like, will this adversely affect the player base? Is this going to fragment the players? Is it going to distribute people away from the main game again? And I think if I were to have to put myself in the shoes of Jagex and try and decide why would they go ahead with a project like this, what would they be looking at? I think I'd be breaking it down into a few factors. I think one of them would be, well, for starters, like, what is Old School as a product, right? It's a product with only essentially one core monetization source, which is the membership system. Membership coming through direct subscriptions or membership bonds, but it's all kind of members. So without being able to apply microtransactions, when they're dealing with the business side of things and how do they grow the business of Old School RuneScape as a product, they're left with relatively limited options, I guess. So in order to maintain that integrity of just membership, like, what can they do? They can try to increase the value or the perceived value of membership for people who are already in the game. So like high quality, frequent content updates in the main game for people to go and experience. That's like the default, I guess. But then additional experiences, I guess, would be the next layer of that. I think that's something that's worth considering. When you've got the multiple groups that I would imagine, again, if I were in Jack's position, I would have looked at and be like, right, are these potential sources of revenue streams that we're not currently tapping into? And a big one I would say is private servers. Like that's the open secret or the elephant in the room. Like everyone knows private servers have always existed, like illegal player-run private servers for decades, since RuneScape has been a thing, right, since the early 2000s. So if they're looking at that and seeing, well, there's still X number of people who don't play an official version of RuneScape anymore, but they do play private servers, is there a way we can get them into our official ecosystem and actually like paying us money again? So that's like a way of increasing their revenue, right? So I think that's a very, to me at least, it feels like a logical thing to look at and a demographic to try and approach if it's a group of players who are just not playing the game at all anymore, not paying for the game at all, trying to lure them back in essentially. I think you've got another group of players as well who they're probably mostly targeting with this, which is probably more so maybe you describe as seasonal players or people who kind of come back to the game, play a little bit and then leave. You probably see this most pronounced with something like leagues. Like we always see a huge spike of player traffic with leagues, right? When a league launches and tons of people come to play the game. And then we also see a bit of a drop off, usually about the same amount as people who came. Because a lot of people are just seasonal gamers. They'll buy a few months membership, play the thing they want to play and then dip out. And for a lot of people, like a league is something like that. But even just with generic content updates, I think that's actually how a surprisingly large number of players actually play the game. They'll drop a month or two's membership or maybe buy a bond, play what they want during that time. Then once they've had their fill, they'll leave. So I think that could be another thing that Project Zanaris could be approached with the intention of behind it, right? Jagex might be looking at that and thinking, how can we convert some of these seasonal gamers who are only periodically paying us membership throughout the year to be slightly more consistent customers of our product? Can we offer them things that are leagues adjacent more regularly that don't require our involvement or input? Can there be just more exciting content updates scattered throughout the year if it's not just reliant on us, but players making cool things? So I think that could all tie into that as well. And I see that as, again, like a second maybe demographic of people they're targeting. I think the third one would probably just be seeing what content creators have done, quite frankly. I think there have been some amazing things that have been shared, like just series and video sets of Swampletics with Settled is probably the most iconic one at this point in time, where he managed to pretty much penetrate the mainstream almost of like gaming audiences outside of just old school RuneScape players directly. And I think you'd be hard pushed not to think that there's probably at least a certain number of people who have come into the game or started dropping some membership again as a result of watching some series like that and just getting excited in the game. Even if they don't necessarily want to play in the way that this content creator is playing, they might be getting excited by it. And seeing other content creators do really spectacular things, like, I guess it's Soup with his Gillinor Games, right? And the whole big spectacle showcase there. And I think there was a recent Deadman, I forget what the variant of it was called, but one with content creators. I think maybe Solo Mission put that together, or was overseeing it. Yeah,
Deadman All Stars.
He had to. Yeah, that's it. Deadman All Stars. I managed to catch some bits of that. And man, I thought that was, from a viewer perspective, that was like such a phenomenally fun, like exciting one to watch. To me, that almost seemed like the definitive Deadman experience. It's like, that's what Deadman should be, not this absolute clusterfuck of the main game stuff. But seeing that, so like, and obviously he had to collaborate presumably with Jagex to get some sort of service set up for that and the specific rule set he was looking for and everything operational. So Jagex is probably looking at that and seeing, at the end of the day, content creators are also referred to as influencers, and they're called that for a reason, because they influence people's decisions in terms of how they part with their money or not. And so people look at these kinds of things as a good marketing tool. And so I imagine if Jagex could see that and be like, right, can we give some of these content creators enough tools that they could sustain these kind of experiences for themselves without needing our oversight or involvement? Like, could we give Solo Mission the capacity to just make a Deadman server anytime we wanted? Could we give Super a way of setting up a special kind of Gillinor Games challenge that doesn't require weird plugins or anything? Can we give people who want to do a region, self-imposed restriction that's even more extreme that you can imagine, 1 life, 1 damage, whatever, only in the desert on every other weekend? Like, can we give them the option to do that? And then if they can and be able to step back, like, that's a huge amount of resources saved if they can just set up that initial infrastructure for other people to then just run with it in any way they see fit. So yeah, that to me would be like a top level Sorry, that got into a bit of like a weird businessy analysis there. I'm not sure if that was the point of this initial discussion, but that's
No,
how
it's
I would be
great.
viewing it. Is like
Yeah.
why Jagex might have gone ahead with this. I don't think it is so much about trying to lure people who just are happy chugging along in the main game, like off of the main game. I do imagine it would be more so looking at all these different prospective audiences that are not traditionally in the main game 100% of the time and are not paying members all the time. How can they bring them into the fold? How can they have those additional experiences? I think that makes sense. Plus, when they've obviously done their own internal and surveys to the players as well, clearly these kinds of servers have come up quite strongly in terms of popularity. So clearly there must be some desire that they've seen, and yeah, those are the metrics I would assume they would be looking at to decide whether this is a good thing to do or not.
That was a great, well thought out analysis. Honestly, I think
Oh, good.
it it's interesting because yeah, I feel like I'm with you. I don't really know what the community consensus is, if there is one. I mean, I know obviously some people are very excited about it. A lot of content creators, a lot of people that follow content creators are excited. I know there's a lot of apprehension, but I don't actually see there being so much negativity. It's mainly just the fear of, you know, people, like you said, leaving the main game, and then there's diversification of just the player base everywhere and every which way. Just, you know, it just becomes, yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. I want to talk to you about like the concerns of it, though. I guess the people, you know, that the apprehensions that people do have over this, which is one is like moderation. I mean, how is Jagex fully allowing the people that are, you know, creating the server to have full autonomy over banning people? And is there going to be, are you going to freely be able to bot, for example? Like what, like, is that going to be a thing where botting is now?
I think, I was gonna say, I think my understanding of it is at a base level, all of the RuneScape terms of service, like everything Jagex rule related, is always going to be applicable to any Project Zanaris server. So like botting is against the rule in main game, it's against the rule in one of these servers. Like no, everything, real world trading, everything else. If it's bannable in the main game, it's bannable in a server.
How are they going to enforce any of that?
That's a very good question. I think whether what their internal systems look like. I mean, man, they already get kind of memed upon at the minute, don't they? It's not always considered to be ideal or operating at a level of effectiveness that I think people would like. So I will share a healthy degree of skepticism there in terms of, can they maintain a good enough level of oversight? I think the second layer of that, part of what you mentioned as well, like, will individual server owners have moderation privileges? I think the short answer to that is also yes. I'm pretty sure they confirmed essentially, so while the base Jagex terms of service will be applicable, you can also apply your own rules on top. So if you want a heavily curated server where people can only do this thing or that thing and you're not allowing this, then you can just ban people from your server if you want to, for additional reasons beyond what the base rules are. So giving players the tools to do that, maybe they're hoping there can be a lot of just self-selected moderation without needing as much input and oversight on their end, if players are willing to maintain their own servers, which I imagine a lot of people will. If you're making a server yourself and looking to run it, you probably will have a much greater sense of I guess protection over it, right? You're going to want to see it being maintained with a good degree of integrity, and if you find bad actors, you're probably going to want to get rid of them. So maybe they're hoping that's going to be, you know, what people rely on, just self-moderation. And maybe even, I don't know, I think every server can be run differently. So some could just be like whitelisted in terms of the only people that can log into this server are people who the server owner accepts to begin with. So that can alleviate a lot of concerns, I think, as well. But yeah, that would be a really, really, really interesting to see what actually pans out in practice, because Lord knows we already see the main game struggling with dealing with rule breakers and issues of moderation. So yeah, expand that out, potentially who knows how much more. That it's going to be a very challenging one to deal with.
Now, would these servers just have one world? I'm assuming it's just one default world, probably capped up to 2,000 players. I don't believe you'd have like multiple servers for one, project. Is that like, do you know anything about that?
Not 100% sure on that one, but that sounds the most logical. I imagine that most people would only need, hopefully, one server. Obviously, there's plenty of bits of gameplay where in theory world hopping is like a meta, but I mean, quite frankly, they shouldn't really exist in the first place.
I agree with you.
The reality is it does exist, but yeah, I imagine most servers. Yeah, I don't actually know what the official stats on that one, but I assume it would the default would probably be people just getting like one world for their one server.
And do you know how much customizability we're going to have? I mean, they say, I mean,
Yeah.
truly it's going to be this sandbox where you can kind of just,
So I
create
think they sort of
dropper tables and whatever else. But yeah,
yeah.
let's hear it. What do you have?
I think my understanding is it's broken in two halves down the middle. So the first thing that is essentially more or less committed to at this stage, what they've basically promised, I suppose, is a fairly simplistic or rudimentary set of maybe what you call binary toggles and changeable values that just serve as like top level modifications of the game as a whole. So I think the first iteration of Project Zanaris servers will be, hey, you can make a blanket XP modifier change. You can change how much damage you deal or receive. You can change if it's a one life only server or not, like a full hardcore server. I think they even said they're implementing certain basic leagues infrastructure. So you can, if you want to select the same like regions that leagues have established as like a region lock system, then you might be able to do that as well. But I think the starts of Project Zanaris are going to be more so on that basic end of, do you want to change some of those simple values of toggling this thing on or off kind of thing, right? Like it's not going to be delving deep into the code base and adding new bits of content and changing lots of things radically. I think it is just going to be like, how does this thing that's already there function? Should it be faster or slower? Should this thing be more difficult or easier or that kind of stuff? The second half is, to me, much more exciting. But again, I don't think anything here has been committed to beyond that point. But the idea of, okay, what if they do go beyond that, and they've expressed a desire to, and I think their intent as a long-term vision is to let people actually delve into, the code base a bit further and actually do some basic scripting and changing things, adding things. There's one part of that long-term vision that gets me personally extraordinarily excited on a purely selfish level, no doubt about it. But if this actually takes us like one step closer towards potentially getting a proper, officially sanctioned 3D map editor that we as players have access to, oh boy, that's been a pipe dream that I assumed was just outlandish and just not even worthy of consideration. But the fact that this is now not absurd, it's like it could happen. It's not definitely going to happen, but if they commit to this system and they're like, right, we like what people are doing, how they're using it, we're going to let people really dig deep and make content, make places, make quests, make bosses. That to me is like so exciting. And again, purely selfish, but if I can not have to load up blooming Photoshop and draw a 2D map of some bloody place, but I can just open up an official map editor and like map something down in 3D and then export and actually like play it and test it and share it with some other people, that'd be amazing. That's so a dream come true.
Can you just imagine, like, if it was so customizable that you actually just made an entire, like, you actually just make an entirely new landmass where nothing is the same in RuneScape. I mean, it's like truly, I mean, oh my God, like I'm just imagining if this was really taken to the extent I'm imagining it would be taken in like a decade down the line. There are just some servers where it is just a truly, I mean, people just, let's just even say recreate a different fantasy world or recreate, something where you enter into this place. And I mean, they've fully Minecraftized it where it's just like, okay, you just created this fantasy place from this other video game and now you're playing this and we're going to add different weapons from this video game. So oh my God, like the full impact of it, like that just sounds insane. But do you think they're going to allow all those tools?
I mean, I personally would love them to. Like, I would really.
Is there
love
any like limitations? Do you think like something where it's like legal limitations? Like, okay, maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah, I guess like you say, like recreating existing IP. I guess that's owned by other things. That it gets into sketchy grounds, doesn't it? If you're trying to recreate the world of Warcraft in whatever old school. But like, I don't know. That opens up a whole new minefield of discussions, and I'm not even beginning to be competent enough, I think, to assess what that would actually truly look like. But I'm definitely, man, I'm so excited about the prospect of that. And I will confess, I've already had conversations with some other people and some of us, especially in the little niche nerdy map making community that we've got, talking like, oh man, what if we banded together? If they let multiple people collaborate on a single server? Again, I'm not even sure how feasible that would be in terms of like tech and sharing things and whatnot. But if it was possible, it's like, oh yeah, what if you did this? What if you added your, southern continent that you've made? What if you added all your eastern lands that you've mapped out and for Rio? And then what if I did this bit? And then we just made a super map of like new stuff. And then I don't know, I've already let my mind wander in terms of what would a hypothetical like alternate old school look like to me? Like if you could go back to basics again and actually not care about like literally moving away from nostalgia for a minute. Like, okay, this is no longer even considering a 2007 server anymore. It's like, what if you were just starting and willing to like massively pull things out of the game, replace them, change out skills, rework entire skills, maybe delete some and put new ones in its place, and like rebalance everything, redistribute everything. Like you could just start again like that. That gets me a little bit, probably again, outlandishly optimistic in terms of if that would be possible, and probably, well, definitely already out of my current skill set. But if something like that could actually be done, I would be very tempted to be like, right, I'm gonna sink a lot of time into just making like an alternate old school version just for fun, see what could happen.
Straight up, I was just gonna interrupt and say, it's like, I almost feel like if I had the coding ability, because everything in my head sounds great. I have to like get somebody else to do it, but I just think of all the rebalancing I would make and making everything. But then at that point, I don't even think I would enjoy playing the game. I would just get so addicted to just making rebalances and making games where I wouldn't even want to play it. I just want to make it.
100%. Oh no, I wouldn't even pretend to like not be like that. I think if we do genuinely get a map editor, I will put my hands up right now and say I may be lost to the game. Like, I may no longer log into the game. Oh god, this is me like now speaking towards those criticisms, right? People saying, are people going to quit the game for this? It's like, for me, I might genuinely, because I would derive so much fun and pleasure from making things like that, making places. I mean, I think back to my, especially like throughout childhood and games I used to play when I was younger, and I used to love, well, a mixture of lots of different games. I was never particularly good at things like strategy games and RTSs, but I did love playing them. And one thing I really loved even more so than that was just tinkering in map editors that came with them. So like making, I don't know, Age of Empires or Empire Earth maps, dude, or like Command and Conquer maps or Settlers maps and different things like that. And I would spend hours and hours making a map in some of these like official or whatever, game map editors, and then sort of make sure it all worked and finished it, and then took a step back and be like, cool. Wouldn't actually play it. I would just move on to make a new map. Okay. So I would absolutely play things like that, and I think I could see myself doing the same with old school. Unfortunately,
I'm totally with it. In fact, just you mentioning Age of Empires, I don't know if you ever played the Conquerors expansion, Age of Empires 2, where they had all these campaigns, and I'm just now beyond map editing, beyond rebalancing. Now I'm thinking, what if you had so much power as to making your own quests? I mean, truly like going in and like, because one of the most fun things that like the things I had most fun with Age of Empires 2 was that Conquerors expansion and the campaigns, because you'd play through these ancient warlords, and you'd go through these little campaigns, and they were so fun. Like, they're so simple, but you'd have your little army of people, and you'd go in and just do a little quest, and try to slaughter this village over here, and just like, if you could somehow program that into RuneScape, and oh my god, that would be so epic. Yeah,
proper like custom adventures, custom quests. If it gets that in depth and intricate, and they can allow it, that would be, again, I totally get that. There's going to be a lot of people who don't see RuneScape, like don't see old school as that sort of game, and I totally get that. Right, they just want to log in to the main game. It's all about their account's progression. What are they leveling up next? What item are they going to get next? What boss are they grinding out next? It's all about that. The permanence and the persistent nature of the game, I think, is a hugely compelling factor for a lot of people. So,
including myself as well.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
I
too,
fall into that as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like, so I totally get. I think a lot of people just won't have any sense of interest or pull for something like this, because I think it does take a different kind of person who enjoys that outlet of just a creative canvas that they can fill in any way that they want, and that's its own enjoyment, right? That satisfaction comes from that for some people, but not for a lot of others. But yeah, what it means, I think that could be really exciting. I mean, in many ways, I think that is it's kind of a logical endpoint for old school anyway, when you consider this game came about because of the community and community interaction and requests and suggestions and content. And if we can come full circle to the point where Jagex can actually let players make content, not just talk about it, not just make a crappy little image post on Reddit or Twitter or something, right? If they can actually make something and prototype it and show people it, and if it's cool enough, and if it's all been built with their internal tools and systems that are cross-compatible with the actual main game, then to me, that is genuinely exciting if Jagex can look at some of those things and be like, this is actually a really cool thing that this player's made. Should we poll it for the main game? I know that might be something that gets people even more scared, but for me, that actually gets me more excited, because if players can make actual proofs of concepts for things, then I don't know. I just think the sky is the limit there. And that, as I say, it truly feels like the core intent of old school and how it came to be, coming full circle finally and like fully realizing its true potential there. But I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself.
No, I don't think you are. I think that's actually that's exactly what we've seen with plugins. I mean, you give players the power and you start introducing really quality of life plugins. And now I'm like with you. I'm with you totally. Where if somebody really comes out with a brand new sort of, even just sort of like skilling activity or boss or anything. I mean, seriously, if it's like there and you can play it right now and it has no consequence right now to the main game. And if it's good enough, I mean, you just straight up add it in. I mean, it's just, you're taking all the best ideas from all these custom servers and putting it into the main game. If they're good enough. I'm not trying to say just add a bunch of garbage. These would be tested. And, and that just sounds incredible. It's such a time save too. Yeah.
And it could kind of go, sort of both ways. Maybe that's not the right way of describing it. But in terms of people who are looking for certain experiences right now that just physically cannot be offered by the main game anymore. Like I know there's still, I mean, heck, just going back to talk about new skills and stuff, like there's still a good contingent of players who don't want anything like that, but then go even further than that. There's a number of people, admittedly it's probably quite a small group at this stage, who don't want any updates to the game, right? They would have loved this game to have been 2007 Scape or some other variant of it. And to me, that's actually quite an exciting concept for Project Zanaris too, because there would be no doubt in my mind, if we get to this point, if the project is continued on by Jagex and they get proper tools and the ability to create and change the game in some ways, then naturally that extends to the fact that people could remove things from the game. So there's no doubt in my mind, if we got to that point, there's going to be enough passionate players out there who are like, screw it, I'll Thanos this, I'll do it myself, right? And they'll just make their own 2007 Scape by just ripping out the last 10 years of content and be like, right, come join my server if you want to play 2007 RuneScape again. And someone else will be like, hey, I've made 2004 RuneScape by ripping out even more content. And so that to me is actually quite exciting too, because that audience of players I think haven't really been represented at all, as the inevitability of time passing and more content getting added. You can't really maintain both of those two things. They're inherently contradictory, right? Having a successful and updating game, but also maintaining the exact 2007 thing. You just can't do it. So if Project Zanaris lets players do it for themselves, that's kind of a win-win, possibly. So that could be quite exciting too.
Yeah, it's going to be... You really got to have... I think there's going to be a huge element of trust with some of these servers, especially like I'm imagining those old school servers where, okay, we are now opening up a 2004 Scape server where nothing will be updated. We're going to, obviously ban anybody that's cheating and whatnot, but no update is going to come out, and this is purely what it is. But then, you don't want to invest too much time, because that would be a server where you do, those players that are into that would want to invest a bunch of time into it. But
definitely,
what, is there going to be any enforcement? There's going to be a huge element of trust in who's running the server without abusing it and stuff. And I feel like that might run into some issues, because I'm not going to lie, there are some pitfalls that come to mind where I think of these. There's so many things I'm optimistic about, but then I'm like, oh my God, like there's going to be some deep issues with some of these servers, especially with abuse and the people running them and stuff.
Sadly, inevitably, someone's going to try and do something a bit shady and dodgy, or try and, I don't know, start up something. But again, it's going to come down to, I guess, a mixture of how much involvement and enforcement Jagex have in things, and what it looks like from both a player perspective, how much you can see when you're joining a server in terms of how it's operated and who runs it and who's playing it and everything like that. But yeah, again, it's one of those things where it's highly speculative, and I guess kind of just time will tell, I suppose. But I'm very excited about the possibilities, at least. It's at this stage, but it's still in its infancy. It has a lot of possibilities, and I'm very excited to see which way it goes.
Okay, I haven't even asked you about this. Have you heard of Brighter Shores, Andrew Gower's new game coming out next
Yes,
month?
yes, I have. I'm quite excited about that
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, I'm pretty excited as well. Now, I don't know much about it. I follow Andrew Gower on Twitter, so I see his updates, and
Yeah,
you know, I'm excited because Andrew Gower obviously created RuneScape, and we all love RuneScape, and so him spending a decade of his life making a brand new game is pretty exciting. So, what are your thoughts on the game, and are you going to be playing it on release?
yeah. No, I definitely plan on checking it out. I think the least I can do after that man is responsible for stealing over 2 decades of my life is give him a chance to do it again another time, right? Like, why not throw it away a second time? Um, no, I'm super interested in what it is. I'm gonna well, I've been trying to remain, mostly both open-minded and not. I'm keeping my expectations low, I think is what I would say.
Yeah.
Um, seeing the brief glimpses of like just early screenshots and little video snippets and things I've seen, it definitely feels like it's probably quite up my street in terms of the kinds of RuneScape interactions that he's kept on and sort of reimagined, and the things that he's maybe discarded and moved away from. I think it looks very kind of skill and progression driven, which I
Hmm.
immediately am drawn to. I like the fact that it looks like it's very, yeah, there's lots of little professions and things you can do and level up there. And just the simplicity of like the point and click tile based stuff is obviously very reminiscent um, to, yeah, traditional RuneScape. So it depends on what the actual scale and scope of it is, because that's really difficult to judge at this point in time. And obviously, I know like Andrew Gower in particular is a really, really, I guess, tech focused person, like a bit of a technical genius, I think. And for that game, my understanding is he's created an entirely new game engine as well. And I think I want to say maybe even like a different programming language to make it. I'm not
Whoa.
technically well versed enough to be able to comment too much on that at all, but from little snippets I've read over the years, I think he's really gone to town on like doing a lot of crazy, impressive, unique stuff behind the scenes. But whether that, how that actually relates to what they've made in terms of a game, whether there's been a lot of technical stuff and there's maybe not a whole lot of gameplay that's been made or overall size of game. I don't know. That again is something I guess we'll have to just see when it comes out. But I'm very interested in it. I don't know if it's going to be the kind of thing that I don't. My gut feeling. I don't know whether this is based on anything valid or not, but my gut feeling is I think a lot of current day RuneScape players, like old school players, are probably not. I was going to say are maybe not going to like it, but I don't know. I don't know whether this is me talking out my backside here because I don't know. There's something about it that just feels much more kind of classic and almost like old RuneScape in some respects, and a very traditional kind of tabletop D&D inspired, like going back to the real origin points of where RuneScape drew its original inspiration from. And it looks like he's going more in that direction. Whereas I feel like the current day of old school is going more in the direction of kind of grander pieces of content and combat encounters and all sorts of different things there to really appeal to where the player base has gone with it. And yeah, I'm curious to know how that actually looks. Again, I might be way off base on that one. I've no idea. But
I don't think you are. I think yeah, this seems a lot more simple and a lot more just progression based.
yeah, that's
Rather,
the
yeah, yeah,
impression I get.
yeah. You're right. OSRS seems to. There has to be some grand quest or grand PVM thing to really start
Yeah,
capturing people's attention nowadays.
'cause I've not really seen any clips of like big, crazy looking boss like
Yeah,
or raid like
yeah.
experience. So it's all been a lot of humble little, some people catching some fish on the shore, which I'm like, that's my jam. I'm down with that. Or like
Same.
chatting some quirky little, British humor dialogue in a quest with a weird NPC. Like, I'm down with that stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So, but I don't know if everyone else who plays the game, who plays RuneScape these days, is in that position as well. But
you're
yeah, we'll
right.
see. I'm totally, I want to check it out when it comes out. I think it's like early next month, isn't it? Kind of a
Yeah.
shame it comes out so soon to, I guess, things like leagues at the end of the month, but I'm
Hmm.
still gonna check out regardless.
Do you think it's gonna be like what elements of RuneScape do you think are going to be like intertwined in Brighter Shores? Like obviously it's very RuneScape reminiscent, but do you think
Yeah,
the leveling system is going to be as egregious as the level 99 system in RuneScape? Do you think they're going to like is this a more like casual experience? Do you think it is more of that real endless sort of progression? Like do you have any hypotheses?
yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I could see it going either way. 'Cause I mean, it's funny thinking back to some of the early days of like what the Gower brothers and Andrew himself spoke about in terms of they made level 99 the cap, not really thinking too much of it, not really assuming players would ever get to it when they first launched the game. And they're like, oh, people are starting to level up. Okay, I guess we'll start putting a few things up there. Like stick some rune armor as the best in slot for smithing, and then, oh look, that gives us like 20 years of problems later down the road. But anyway, yeah, I think seeing some of that, whether he's taken that on board and maybe, I don't know, whether he would have intentionally designed around it. I've definitely seen clips or some bits of Brighter Shores, I'm pretty sure, where it shows some sort of message about saying if you log out, this is like an idle activity that your character will keep doing after you log out. So when you log back in, you'll have like a little bit of extra stuff or more XP in this thing you were doing.
Oh,
so
wow.
If that kind of thing exists, it's almost like I could see that being a clever way of maybe Andrew trying to circumvent the desire to bot. If you're just like, well, just log out if you feel like not playing the game, but you want to still progress.
Mm-hmm.
If the game is built with that in mind, then that would lead me to believe maybe he's leaning more into the casual centric audience, which I think makes sense in this day and age, quite frankly. It's probably really difficult to try and sell a true RuneScape, like a proper old style RuneScape, heavy, grindy game like that to a modern audience of gamers who are so like instant gratification driven. Like that in and of itself is going to be a really fascinating one to see what that game does in terms of just the wider gaming community or industry wide, because I don't know where the appetite is for those kinds of games these days, or whether it even exists, or whether it's just weirdos like us who just sort of like cling to that stuff for the past 2 decades and keep craving more of it, but whether there's like newer generations of people who do actually or would like that kind of stuff if it was presented to them in the right way.
Yeah, I'm interested in it. I'm definitely going to give it a fair shot and see how I enjoy it. Because again, I do feel like my expectations are pretty low, and I worry about having way too high of expectations for things. But I feel like they're very balanced right now, and I'm like, okay, like this, I could log in, not enjoy it at all, and that's that. But I have a suspicion that I'll really enjoy it. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to approach it in that mindset of I'm happy to chuck some money Andrew's way again, have a little mooch about in it. If I like it for a week and have fun, and then that's it, cool, that was fine, and then I'll be happy walking away from it. Or again, if it ends up consuming years of my life again, then cool as well, I guess. I'm fine either way at this point.
Okay, Screet Monge on Twitter he has 2 questions.
Yes.
If you could change the community's perspective on one thing, what would it be?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a really good question, and it's difficult to answer as well, I think. I think as much as it's maybe rehashing some earlier comments and discussions, I'd probably err more on the side of, if I could change the community's perspective on anything, it would probably be that whole discussion we had about how people communicate with each other and how they communicate with Jagex. And if everyone could just be a little bit less antagonistic, we could probably all get a lot more things that we each respectively would want. And then also, if people could more effectively articulate their feedback in a constructive way and present directions that they would like things to go in with a list of reasonable reasons why that is, I think the game as a whole would probably be in a much, much better spot if everyone could just contribute in that kind of way. So I don't know whether that's the kind of answer they'd be looking for there, but I think that just comes to mind again after our conversation earlier about what would be the most impactful change if you could instill anything in the community. It'd probably be that. Like there's so much to be said for, I mean, this goes beyond game related stuff, old school related stuff, just like how you, I don't want to come across as like annoying, obnoxious, preachy, philosophical talking now, but like genuinely, like how you communicate is pretty much just as important as what you communicate. Like the information you have and present is only half the battle, really. Like you can be objectively correct, factually in the right. You are presenting 100% accurate information. If you convey that information very poorly, it's not going to matter. You might as well be wrong. Like people aren't going to want to listen. People are going to be dismissive of it. Likewise, the opposite can be true as well. Sometimes you can have a very, very charismatic person who knows how to charm people and share ideas and things, but all their ideas suck. And they have the worst things. They're pushing horrible agendas. I don't know. But, the important thing there is I think you've got to have that mixture of both. You can't just rely on one thing. And yeah, it would be so nice if the community as a whole could just be a little bit less mean to each other. just be a bit positive, right? Like try and see the good in things. And I think genuinely positivity breeds more positivity rather than just I don't know, it just makes me sad sometimes. I try to never, I mean, most social medias in general, I try to avoid as best as I can, especially some like Twitter I really don't like. And whenever I venture there and look at like the old school tweets, there's always, unfortunately, like similar names that seem to be there and just seem to hate everything, but like just everything, responding to every tweet and like every content creator's tweets. And it's like, do you like the game? Are you happy? Because it feels like the answer to both of those things is no. And that's really concerning. And I feel like there are some people who almost revel in that degree of negativity and just want to exist in it and manifest it for themselves, and actually are maybe not interested in getting things to a better spot either for themselves or the game. And they're just sort of content to exist in this negative spiral. But I just don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's nice. I think we could be in a much better environment if everyone could at least try and push out a little bit more positivity into the world. But anyway, sorry, that's a really gross, preachy, cheesy answer to give, but
I love it. And I think a lot of people agree with you. You know, we generally do get a lot of loud people that are spewing toxicity, but there are so many great people and a lot of people that probably just don't share ideas, even though they would be, you know, those kind of people that would be more in a, you know, positive and constructive criticism types of people that are probably just have busier lives and just don't care. But the people that are just chronically online, you know, those are the people that are going to be chronically online typing the stuff that they type. So yeah, I'm actually, you know, just to linger on it a bit longer, is I do feel quite optimistic about the player base. I think, you know, you look back 8, 9, 10 years ago at gamers and the communities that we had. I mean, we've grown up a lot. We really have.
Oh, yeah.
So luckily, and especially old school, I mean, old school, we're not getting this influx of teenagers playing it. It was just, you know, we're all getting up a lot more just older, and we're adults at this point, and we've matured a bit. So I'm happy to see a lot of progression toward a more like healthy, you know, community. And I think that actually has happened, but I think it is just kind of hard to see. And again, it is hard to see when you do have bad actors that are just incredibly toxic. That kind of shade the whole thing. Okay. He does have another question. What do you most look forward to in Old School's future? I would probably, if it's not Project Zanaris, that's one thing we're just talking about. So, but I
was going to say, I think it's going to have to be that now, after how hyped just got talking about the prospect of the long term of, if we did get map editors and content creation tools and all sorts of opportunities like that, that's a really exciting future, if that's what Old School's future could look like. And the landscape of like the kind of content we're getting as well with the Old School team, because they are of such a pretty big size these days that they can take on so many different projects all at once. And we can have big area expansions like Varlamore running concurrently with big new skills being developed behind the scenes like sailing, and huge tech infrastructure improvements to the client, and, you know, plug in API features in their default stuff. So I think there's so many exciting things on the table these days that, you know, even just a few years back when the player base was a little bit smaller and the team was a little bit smaller, you couldn't have really expected it to have gone in this direction. And it's crazy to think that the game is as healthy as it is, as much as people can, we can all doom and gloom. Like, you look at the player counts and everything, it's like, this is basically the most successful the game's ever been, like ever. Like, even back in the heyday, the mid 2000s, like, it's crazy how successful this is.
We're still in the golden era. I mean, I would think we're in the peak of the golden era. I mean, we're so lucky.
Yeah, and I think it's, to me, if Old School is the kind of game where if the team and the community collectively can keep doing the right things, then I don't see any reason why it has to stop necessarily. I think there's probably going to be a weird situation where a large chunk of the community continues to grow with the game, and that is going to be strange, just like it's grown from essentially a children's game being played by children to a game being played by young adults to now, in some cases, maybe my own, we're not so young anymore of adults as we're getting on. And that's going to be an interesting future as everyone starts to, you know, 10 years from now, pushing middle-aged and, I don't know, beyond that. One day everyone just playing it in their shared retirement homes, just having big old school RuneScape parties. I mean, to be honest with you, that sounds like quite a nice, wholesome future if that ends up being the case. If the game has legs to stand on like that, then, which I think it does, if the old school team can keep doing all the right things and the players can help steer things that direction, and with the content we've got on the way in Project Zanaris, big exciting stuff like that, then who knows? I think all the pieces are there. the pieces of that could lead to a really, really exciting future like that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, I guess, a bit of everything overall. Where we've been headed in general, I'm quite pleased with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Renegades has several questions, but one that really we haven't spoken about. The other two we've definitely touched on, but he's asking, how have you found the backported quests? Do you want Jagex to do more? Ooh. And I guess I'll expand on that before I let you answer, which is, what are your thoughts on original quests coming to RuneScape and backported? Like, do you think it's appropriate to keep following the RuneScape 3 lore down that, or do you think it's a better approach to create new stuff? And what are, I don't know, maybe the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, I guess as a quick answer on the top, I would say I'm very much now strongly in favor of unique, original, old school stuff, quests or otherwise, quite frankly. And the backporting stuff, not so much. I'd say when you look at the backdrop of the game that we've had so far and the kind of backporting content we've had, I think I'm at the point where, to begin with, I was quite in favor of that. If the principle behind the idea of what backported content represents is actually the case, which is backporting something saving a significant amount of development time? Like, is this like a pretty quick turnaround project, something that could be, to grossly oversimplify things, copy pasted into old school? Like, is that the case? And it means we get content that we otherwise just wouldn't get. If that's the case, then cool. Okay, yeah, sure. Like, backport more stuff, more quests and things, if it means we're getting that in addition to other stuff. But I think my question would come, this is what I'd love to hear the old school team themselves dive deep into this. It's like, are we actually getting that significant time save from some of these? Like, I'd look at some like Wild Gothic Sleeps and I'd question my understanding of that. Is that actually went through some, while the core structure of the quest itself is pretty damn close to being identical to what the original quest was, it had actually a lot of underlying changes to it. And I think that was even some, a bit of like friction I think was caused there in terms of what was cut and what was changed and stuff with regards to the original stuff. I think a lot of dialogue and optional text and different lore was slightly tweaked. So they clearly went in quite in depth and changed a fair bit. So spent a good amount of dev time and budget on that. I think, again, I don't want to speak out of line, but my understanding is, generally speaking, they probably would have essentially like coded the quest mostly from scratch again, just because I think they're reluctant to want to backport 2008 era spaghetti code, as it were, right, and just add to the pile. So they'd rather start with a clean, fresh slate and just, take the core themes and some of the dialogue and bits. But if they're doing a lot of that, then I would question, obviously, that they did some very extensive changes, like Tormented Demons and stuff are all completely different than what they were, and there's a bunch of different things there. So I think that's where a lot of my judgment kind of falls down on, like, is this saving us a lot of dev time to the point where we're getting significantly more quests or content in general as a result of backporting stuff? And if yes, then okay, I can accept that. But overall, I'm not super big on backporting content. Certainly not anymore. I think after Wild Gothic Sleeps, maybe I'm feeling a bit like, I guess I should just like own up my own personal dislike. I never really was that overjoyed about Wild Gothic Sleeps specifically as well. I mean, that's like was the most recent big one that we've had backported. I always felt like that narratively, I won't bore you with narrative and lore discussions too much, but yeah, I always felt like it was quite weak from a narrative perspective, and it did things that were a little bit just purely for shock value, and at the time were really impressive and like, whoa, crazy. We've never seen anything like that before, and it made sense for 2008. But when you add in almost 15 plus years of additional stuff and all the quests the old school team have made and all the content they've produced, something like that just doesn't stand up to scrutiny anymore, in my opinion, both narratively and like structurally with the content. I think Wild Gothic Sleeps is probably the weakest Grandmaster quest we have in game now. And I think the old school team, if they had have just used it as a launch pad of, hey, let's do a quest that is about Lucian wanting to get the Stone of Jazz, but let's just do our own quest, I think we would have ended up with a significantly better piece of content, personally. Purely because, again, I want to sing the old school team's praises here. I think they've been knocking it out of the park with their original stuff, and especially on the quest front, right? Like your Desert Treasure 2s, your Dragon Slayers, your Song of the Elves, everything else in between. It's like, I think they're so good at what they do now. I'd much rather see more of that original creativity or things that are just loosely inspired by old stuff rather than bringing back the old. And again, I would say this, I'd expand out to beyond quests. I think things like Soul Wars as a mini game and even like Nex as a boss, I feel like none of those really hit a mark where players were overwhelmingly overjoyed by them. Like I don't think I really saw any huge like praise from the rooftops singing their, joys of how good they were.
You're
I think
right.
there were a lot of sort of tepid responses, like, yeah, this was fun, this is kind of nostalgic, I remember this. And then it's like, oh yeah, and I remember all the things I didn't like about it now. But then they're stuck between a really awkward spot. It's like, well, if they're bringing back a piece of content for nostalgia purposes, they can't really make extensive changes without annoying the people who wanted it there for nostalgia reasons.
Yep.
So it means you end up leaving like lingering issues potentially that you can't fully fix or change. And yeah, I don't know. I just think old school as a game has been so much better. Even if there have been misses, and there will be misses amongst the hits for like original and unique content as well. That's always going to happen. But I think by and large, we get better content on average when it's unique and originally created for old school with just some loose inspirations taken from other stuff. So yeah, I don't know. A bit of a lengthy answer that ended up being. Backports, I've definitely drifted away from. I'd only want to see them if they're really truly saving us lots of time, and it means we're getting a lot more content as a result. But I'm not 100% sure if that actually is the case.
Yeah. It probably saves a decent chunk, but yeah.
I imagine it must save at least some, especially from like the design standpoint, because that can be quite a lengthy process of actually coming up with a new design to begin with. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'd prefer to see them take longer and just, I guess essentially it's the age-old question of like quality over quantity, or like which do you prefer? I think I would lean towards the quality at this point.
I agree with you. Okay, this is kind of so I'm gonna be getting Josh Strife Hayes on the cast very soon, and he's all about MMOs. And I've just been catching up on some of his content, and one of the things he was doing a video on like playing 100 hours of EverQuest, and I've never played that game or anything, but apparently in the beginning of the video he's just talking about like how a lot of veterans of EverQuest are like, oh yeah, the game doesn't get good until 100 hours in. And he's like, who has 100 hours to spend to get to that point where you start enjoying the game? So I want to kind of revamp that question and ask you, we are playing a game where vast majority of players are veterans of this, and we know the game inside and out. So when you play a new account, you kind of just know what you're going to be doing. And I would say there's a pretty strong correlation between enjoying old school, 100 hours in, more than you are right off the bat for the brand new player. And I want to ask you, like, do you have any thoughts, or have you thought of things that could improve the new player experience with keeping the nostalgia that we know and love and keeping it old school, and not overly simplifying things? Because I actually do think the charm of RuneScape is actually just the vastness and the open world nature of the game, where it's like you just plop in and here you go, just do whatever you want. I don't want to get rid of that. Don't want arrows everywhere pointing what to do. But have you ever thought about things that could improve the new player experience?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's such a interesting topic, and as you say, I'm in agreement with you there. I think part of old school's beauty is both its simplicity and its open world sandbox nature. That truly, it's not like a lot of other MMOs which lean more theme parky, as they call it, and kind of railroad you down these certain tracks and keep you on a line. I think we've got to be careful not to ever let old school do that too much. There have been a few new early game systems that have been added, and the old school team have experimented with, that give players a little bit additional push and a sense of direction, give them like a little list of mini objectives to do very early on, which I get makes sense. And I think that's the big divide that exists in terms of what happens between that gulf of you've just been told exactly what to do on Tutorial Island, and then you're dropped in Lumbridge and then not told anything at all after that point. And like, how do you sort of bridge that one? I think that's really difficult to get right. For the most part, I wouldn't want to see, because I think you could definitely overcomplicate that system and try to enforce like a rigid set of things that you would try and get a player to do. And I don't think that would be the right thing at all. I think it'd be more the case of ensuring there are, in terms of like what you can do or could add, I'd definitely be keen to see more things in the extreme early game experience that could be kind of dropped into. Actually, I'll tell you what, I'm going to segue slightly and give a little anecdote, because not all that long ago, based on different bits and pieces that I'd done with work with Jaggers and whatnot, I was connected with like an old friend of mine, and from like back in school days, and kind of like casually mentioned that, and like, oh yeah, I've been doing some bits for this company. I was like, oh my god, like RuneScape. Oh yeah, no, I've been playing that on like mobile and stuff. I was like, oh no way, sick. This was like 20 years ago we last played this together. It's like, yeah, we should like log in and do something. I was like, cool, yeah, we should. But then like sitting back and thinking about it and seeing, okay, what kind of like account and character has he got? Like, where is he at? I was like, oh, okay, it's very early game. We're talking like a free-to-play character with level like 20 to 30 stats. It's like, okay, well, you've already put in a good number of hours, and from their perspective, they've played it a lot, because that's like, oh yeah, like I spent hours playing this over the course of multiple weeks. It's like, yeah, no, you probably did. And it's like, okay, but what do we actually do? And okay, I've got some random splattering of old low-level accounts, so I could log into one, but then what do we do at level 20 in free-to-play, like mulling about in Lumbridge and Varrock? And it kind of dawned on me, especially from a multiplayer perspective. And obviously, so many people love this game for the single-player oriented gameplay style and Iron Man mode and all that stuff, but it is still an MMO at the end of the day, and it's quite strange when you take a step back and realize there really isn't any proper multiplayer content that you can do for hundreds of hours, like realistically, not proper, good, deep, engaging multiplayer content that people find fun. That isn't just, let's both go and stand on the same fishing spot together, right? Like catch fish. So that made me think, like, what could you do in that regard? And I'd love to see some things where it was more, can you create a sort of a soft or kind of, you know, a nice, easily accessible piece of group content that's aimed at being fun? And I was even thinking in terms of, would it be cool to have some sort of very low level, I'm talking like even lower than recent like Scurious type bosses, like seriously low level, aimed for people with like level 10 stats, level 20 stats, level 30 stats? Could you have something like that existing somewhere on the overworld of free to play? And then having some sort of system where it was very comfortable, drop in, multiplayer, little fun boss where someone could sort of walk around their usual path and just see it, and then go and kind of jump in, see other people fighting it, and just join in immediately. And I think stuff like that might go quite a long way. If there's pieces of content, I guess not necessarily bosses, but just like little sprinklings of things where it has like multiplayer engagement built into it that someone can just sort of stumble upon and go and instantly do with someone else without needing to spend a huge amount of time and investment to get into it. But yeah, exactly what that needs to look like and how it should be implemented is really, it's quite challenging, but I'd love to see some more things like that, because I do think that really highlighted for me that there's a real lack of true early game stuff. And all of us who've been playing for blooming years, we do get very heavily warped perceptions, I think, in terms of, oh yeah, no, it's fine. Like you mentioned, some games where it's like, oh yeah, hundreds of hours put into it, and then you get to the good bit. But yeah, for most people, that's not a compromise they're willing to make, and it shouldn't really be the case like that. Like, it doesn't have to be in the grand scheme of things. There's no reason why we couldn't have a fun little boss that has really low stats but a lot of HP at a very low level zone that a lot of people could just go and fight in a multi-combat area, right? Just for fun. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like super impactful or anything. Just like, hey, here's a thing that a lot of people can go and whack away at with their bronze and iron scimitars or something. Like, it doesn't have to revolutionize content or be game-breakingly changing or anything. Just something fun that multiple people can engage with that naturally like leads people to it.
Yeah, you're right. I think I don't think the sand crab boss that they're trying to come out with is free to play. I don't know.
No, I doubt it would be. Yeah.
I was even just thinking when you were saying that, I was like, just how cool would it be if, you're just browsing around Lumbridge on your free to play account, 20 combats basically, and there are these random events that happen where it's like this goblin army comes from the north down to that goblin hut, and now it's just like a little mini quest basically that just occurs here and there, and you can just bring your friends and you just fight off these goblins that are just fighting other goblins kind of. So it's just like this little scenario that happens here and there, but then you get this boost of XP at the end. So it's kind of like a training method to go in and help the goblins fight the northern goblins, or just something like that, or some superior cow that just spawns randomly. You can all jump in and kill the cow together. Like, I have no idea.
Yeah, because in the early, like the first year or two, was it, of Old School's Life, there was that goblin invasion like event that they ran a couple times. Like, there was a literal thing. Yeah, it's quite obscure, because again, this was during the era where there was barely anyone playing and they couldn't really make much new content, so it was all just reusing assets and cobbling together basic temporary events. But yeah, there was like a goblin invasion event, so I know that'd be quite cool. Again, like I agree, there's just something little like that, using some of those low level zones and assets, and a weird, I don't know, rework the old evil chicken and just make it like a chicken boss or something, like a low level chicken boss that people can go fight near Lumbridge or whatever.
It is funny though, because there is that kind of element of like, man, there really should be some more multiplayer stuff, and then they sprinkle the tiniest bit of multiplayer and it just becomes the biggest nuisance. I'm thinking of like Shield of
Yeah.
Arav and the Heroes Quest. You gotta get like one player to just do one simple little thing for you, and it's just like, oh my god, like I gotta do this. Like, oh my gosh, I gotta go talk to a player to get them to do something. But
Yeah, that's a shame. I guess that's why the ideal thing would be like almost like drop in, drop out multiplayer. So it's not
yes.
mandatory multiplayer, but just something that a piece of content that can accommodate as many people as it needs to, I guess is the right way of putting it, right? So maybe you've got this slightly higher level cow or chicken or goblin or something that one person can fight, but maybe multiple people can fight. If they can do more like Perilous Moon stuff where it's technically everyone can fight it, but you've got your own personal progression on it, right? Within the fight. That's a really interesting concept. I wonder if they could do more with that, to have, again, more like pseudo multiplayer encounters where technically it's a solo fight, but as many people can fight as they want, and it can feel a bit group oriented, and you're all sharing the same mechanics at the same time. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested to see if they could make that work in more areas of the game, and maybe a really, really low level one would be a cool way of experimenting with it.
Yeah, I mean, even just like a Lumbridge dungeon. I mean, we have we have like the Varrock sewers. We got the the Edgeville dungeon kind of, but like I feel like we don't have a good like medieval dungeon that's really just kill stuff vibes in free to play.
Yeah.
Just just go down there and just start slaughtering this ugly slug that's massive, and you all just group up onto it. Just something like that.
Yeah, I mean that should really be something with again with all those goblins mulling about in Lumbridge. Like there should be a little bit of proper lore and exposition given to them. I feel like, I guess there's been bits and pieces over the years, but giving them a little dungeon where they've come from and broken through the surface, and that's why they're ravaging Eastern Lumbridge now when it's all in ruins. And now you've got a little fun low level goblin dungeon that people can go in from level whatever 5 to 20 or something.
Yeah, there is so much to this game. I'm always happy to talk to players like you. You just radiate passion, and I'm so glad that we just have this amazing community that begins again. Like there are so many people that just live and breathe this game. They'll design plugins. I mean, people, especially with PVM, are coming out with like amazing DPS calculators and simulators of things, and amazing plugins to help out new players. They're just doing it freely. I mean, it's just it's beautiful.
One of the best wikis on the planet as well.
Oh yeah, the best. I mean, it's so good.
Yeah.
Okay, Gentle Tractor. I know this is not the 4.5-hour special that most people probably anticipated, but I think it's a great time to wrap up. And
Definitely.
I've truly enjoyed talking to you each time. It's a pleasure, and
likewise.
Thank you. And I think a lot of people are gonna enjoy this one. So, trying to think. Is there? I know you're not really on Twitter that much. Do you want your Twitter linked down in the description?
I mean, you can do. I wouldn't recommend anyone follow me because I don't tweet. And apologies to anyone out there who maybe like messages me on Twitter or Reddit. I might check it like 3 months after the fact. Apologies if you've ever tried to reach out to me. If anyone actually wants to, your best bet is probably hit me up on Discord. But yeah,
okay. Well, how about
I'm not a huge social media goer, so I'm more lurking behind the scenes.
I will have I'll have your Twitter link down there just for funsies, but I'll have your Discord linked as well if that's okay for people to
that's fine. Yeah,
reach out if they're interested. But thank you very much, Gentle Tractor, for coming on. Hopefully in the next year or two, and get you back on, we can re-gauge how the game's going, and maybe Project Zanaris is out. We can talk a little bit more about that, the fruition of it. So
absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you everybody for listening. If you want to support the cast, as always, there is a Patreon and a YouTube membership link. You can support down there. As I said a little bit earlier, we are going to be having Josh Strife Hayes on the cast, which is a huge guest. He's got a huge YouTube following, and he knows everything about MMOs, and he's always loved RuneScape, and I think we're going to have a great discussion there. So look forward to that next week. And that's it for me. Thanks again, Gentle Tractor.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.